I don't rule the Yankees out just yet, but Boston, New York, two teams to keep an eye on. But as we get closer to opening day, I think there's going to be some more urgency on the Cardinals' part to try to get something done. Because if he opens the season in St. Louis, that's just a bad situation for both sides.
Yes, it's the day that ends in Y, which means we're talking about Nolan Arenado here on BK and Ferrario. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. You got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. T-Bone, it's seemingly Nolan Arenado Day in the national media. Mark Feinsand just said that earlier today on MLB Network. We saw Jeff Passan wrote a piece earlier today saying the New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers seem to be long shots to make a move for Nolan Arenado. But he then added that the Red Sox remain the landing spot that makes the most sense. Though Nolan Arenado uses no trade clause to block the deal to Houston this winter, he would waive it to end up in Boston, according to sources. He then continued, the Cardinals have not budged enough on the money they're willing to send with the remaining 3 years and $64 million on Arenado's deal. Moving Arenado could force St. Louis to eat upward of half of the money that he is owed. Short of that, Boston's interest in Arenado is, quote, iffy, end quote. The Cardinals' direction will become clearer when owner Bill DeWitt Jr. decides whether to kick in more money to facilitate an Arenado deal. Just how willing he is to do so will become more clear in the coming days or weeks. Again, all of that coming from Jeff Passan of ESPN.com. T-Bone, to me, the Cardinals' offseason has been a reflection of its ownership. The ownership group has decided at the beginning of the offseason, we are terrified of this current TV landscape. And that means shed salary in every way possible, Mo. Like, if there is a guy hitting free agency, you do not bring him back. If there is an opportunity to decline any player or team options, you do not accept that team option.
And we go to ARB with everybody.
Absolutely. If there's $500,000 to be able to be saved on Lars Newport or even Brendan Donovan, or hell, $250,000 to be saved for Andre Palante, you damn well better find a way to do so. That appears to be the overall 10,000-foot view from ownership, or at least it was at the beginning of the offseason. And so with that in the back of our minds, we all thought, okay, well, that means that Contreras is probably gone. Sonny Gray probably gone. Eric Fuddy, it's only $7.5 million, but you could get a pretty significant return from him this offseason. He's probably gone too. You take this massive step back, you give the young guys the opportunity, let's see what it looks like. And then things seemingly changed. They won't agree with this, but from our perspective, from their words and actions, it sure seems like something changed during the offseason. And it seemed to change right around the time that they locked in that TV deal, T-Bone.
Yep.
Because now there's less uncertainty in the future. And suddenly Contreras is back. And Sonny Gray's not going anywhere. Eric Fetty's still here. Like they've got all of these guys locked in. They're less willing to just throw money at the problem that is Nolan Arenado to get him off of the books. And I think all of this is a reflection of ownership doesn't want this team to be terrible. They want the Cardinals to be competitive. It matters to them, whether it matters to you or not. It seems to matter to them to keep that above 500 record out there. And it has them once again stuck in the middle. They don't have a direction right now, man. They said that their goal this offseason was to get younger, to give these guys the runway. And what have they actually done to provide that to young players? So far, nothing. A whole lot of nothing. Yeah, Contreras is changing positions, but it's just blocking Burleson at first. They thought they were going to move Nolan Arenado. Haven't done that yet. They could have made a move in the rotation with Matz or Fetty or Michaelis or Gray. Didn't do any of that. They could have removed Ryan Helsley from the closer position, given that opportunity to Ryan Fernandez. Didn't do that. I don't mind that, but all of these are moves they could have made. They made none of them, and they didn't add. They've not added a single player via free agency on a guaranteed major league deal. So they're once again stuck in the middle, and they continue to look for a suitor for Nolan Arenado. And it sounds, according to reports, like all of that comes down to their willingness to eat the money, which is once again a reflection of ownership.
Yeah, and I thought, coming into this offseason when they had that first press conference and said, hey, youth movement, that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on drafting and developing, and we're going to go younger. I was like, okay, I'm in on this, you know. I don't think you're going to be very good, but I'm in. I'm willing to listen to it. But now that reports have come out like, hey, they have to eat half the money on Arenado, which felt like it was always going to have to be, right? They were probably going to have to eat a significant portion. Their best deal was the Houston one for sure until Arenado nixed that. I just can't figure out what they're doing, and I think you're spot on is they're just stuck in the middle, and I think ownership clearly wants them to still be competitive. And I think you can trace that back to, think about the DeWitts and what they have said about they were asked at winter warm-up, something along the lines of like ticket sales. How are ticket sales doing? And what do they keep always referencing? It's not, hey, yeah, we're expecting ticket sales to be down because we're going through youth movement. It's, well, if we get off to a good start, ticket sales will be there. And I think that is now that we've had this conversation, to me, that's the quote where I'm like, yeah, you're right. They don't want to be that bad. They are stuck in the middle. I don't think they really want to move on from Nolan Arenado because they have said, hey, if Arenado's on the books, we've got the budget for that, right? And that's the key is I thought for sure it was, hey, Arenado's got to get the hell out of town because we can't have this kind of payroll.
That's what I thought at first, too.
And then it suddenly became, no, hey, we're good. Arenado's on the books. It's fine. Well, okay, if that's the case, and we did really want to go in a youth movement, that means we could eat half of the money on an Arenado deal and ship him to Boston if that's what it takes to get a deal done with the Boston Red Sox. And instead, ownership still seems to be blocking this kind of a trade. So I think you're kind of right on of, hey, they don't want this team to be bad. And the way that they view that is, hey, we have to have a Nolan Arenado here on this team. Hey, Ryan Helsley, he's still got to be the closer for this team because, look, he just set the franchise saves record. And I agree. It's not the worst thing in the world that they didn't deal him this offseason, but you could have done something, right? And they've just kind of sat on their hands. They've even avoided the path of least, well, not completely. They kind of avoided the path of least resistance.
I think they went the exact path of least resistance, which is let all of the guys go that you didn't have to make any real hard decisions on and then just sit the rest of the offseason out.
And the reason I say, like, they kind of avoided it was, like, there's clearly a market for an Eric Fetty. And you could have gotten something meaningful in return.
That's aggressive to make that move because then you don't have the potential of a qualifying offer next offseason, which they have talked ad nauseum about. Hey, we don't have enough picks. We've lost our picks. We haven't had that mid-round pick for the qualifying offer. Like, they've talked a lot about that. And they want a $7.5 million pitcher that they traded for at the deadline last year. They want to get something in return for Tommy Edman, right? The Tommy Pham part of it obviously did not work out for them. So you got to get some kind of return for that, and Eric Fetty is the return. I don't think this team's ownership wants to be bad, like actually bad. I don't blame them for that. I appreciate that about them. I just think the way they're going about it is a little... You really have to talk yourself into this team in order to believe in what their plan is. Because Nolan Arenado wasn't very good last year. Hasn't been very good for the last couple of seasons now. I think you could get similar production out of Nolan Gorman or Brendan Donovan, maybe Thomas Sajaci, eventually J.J. Weatherholt. Like, you've got a lot of middle infielder, third base types on this roster right now. Eventually, you're going to have to make decisions on who you're actually building around. Arenado is not going to be a part of that. But if you're an ownership group that values having Hall of Famers on the roster every year, Arenado is that, and he might be the only one currently on the roster. I just get the feeling at this point that the Cardinals aren't as gung-ho. Let me clarify. The ownership might not be as gung-ho about trading Arenado, selling him off at all costs this offseason as the front office is. Because Mo clearly has made this abundantly evident to everybody that will listen to him.
Priority 1, 2, and 3.
He wants to move Arenado. And then it becomes about how do I make that possible? And the easiest way to do that is to eat money on the deal. But that requires approval from ownership. And it's pretty clear at this point. They haven't gotten that approval from ownership yet. So some of this might be negotiating tactics of like, hey, we're not going to eat the money. And then you wait out Boston. And then when Bregman signs, they get desperate. And now they're willing to take on more of the salary because they just want an answer at third base. It's possible. Man, you're playing a game of chicken that's pretty dangerous right now. And if you end up being stuck with Nolan Arenado this year, some would say that's not a bad problem. I would say it means that you completely failed at your one obligation of the offseason.
Yeah, and to your point on the Boston Red Sox, I think based on how reporting has been laying things out, it's pretty clear the Red Sox don't want to give Bregman the 6-year deal, right? So right away, my first thought is they're ready to pivot. I feel like the Red Sox are ready to pivot. And maybe I'm reading that situation wrong. I think they're ready to pivot if you eat the money. I think the Red Sox, if Mo called them today and said, hey, ownership is green light, we're going to eat 50% of this, I think we would see the tweets from Jeff Passan, Buster Olney, hey, the Cardinals are trading Nolan Arenado to the Boston Red Sox. And I think you're right. I think Mo's ready to make that pivot and go towards this youth movement, kind of clear the books for a Chaim Bloom to take over next year and allow Chaim to, and I'm sure Chaim would love this as well, hey, clear off as much money as possible so I can see what we have, figure out what we need when I take over, and then if ownership greenlights me to spend money back to the point that they've been claiming they're willing to go back to in their spending, then I know what we're going to need going into the next future off seasons. But I think ownership is what you're saying. I think ownership wants them to be stuck in the middle. And I go back to that quote from Sonny Gray of, hey, you got to pick a direction. And I think the front office has been clearly saying, hey, we're ready to go young.
Yep.
And ownership is saying, well, we can do both, right? We can have a Hall of Famer
Bingo.
at third base, and we can have the youth movement. Ollie can manage this, right? Newbar's in center, maybe, and then we've got Donovan in left. Oh, we can still get Burleson some at-bats, Herrera possibly. But no, that you end up getting stuck to where now Ollie's back in that position he was 2 years ago with the outfield mix, where he looks at it and goes, I can't get guys consistent at-bats, and now they're struggling because they can't get consistent playing time.
The trickle-down effect is what he's been talking about, and he made mention of this a number of times yesterday at Cardinal spring training, as TMA is down there broadcasting live each and every morning. Hope you heard that today. You heard from a few of the young guys that are potentially going to be a part of the mix, including Gordon Graceffo, Quinn Matthews, Victor Scott, and Lucan Baker. But it's part of that runway conversation. If you do end up having Nolan Arenado on the roster, it's not just about, hey, blocking some of those opportunities for some of the young guys. It's also, well, now you have to make decisions on the lineup every single day. And who's going to get those opportunities? Well, it's the guys that are hitting. So if you're the guy that isn't hitting at any given time, you don't get that same runway that you would have otherwise to be able to fail at the big league level and just keep going out there. Not have to worry about the old Colton Wong thing with Mike Matheny where, hey, if you struggle one day, you don't know if you're going to be in the lineup the next day, and that puts a lot of pressure on you to perform each and every day as a young player.
And it puts pressure on the front office, right? Of, hey, do we keep him up here, or is he better off developing in the minors?
And then you end up in the same position that you've been in previous seasons. So whether that's for Nolan Gorman or Alec Burleson, like those are some of the guys that could get a little bit of a roster crunch here, and it ends up being a really frustrating time for everybody involved, whether it's the manager, the president of baseball operations, or fans watching it that don't have a clear understanding because the team doesn't have a clear understanding of what exactly the plan is at this point. All right, coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll talk to Jeremy Rutherford. He's our Blues insider for 101 ESPN and The Athletic. As the Blues go into this little mini break for the Four Nations face-off, where does he see the Blues at? There's been a lot of speculation nationally about what they're potentially going to do at the trade deadline, but let's get a little bit of a state of the franchise address from Jeremy Rutherford. That's coming up in about 15 minutes. But next, I do want to put kind of a bow on what we saw in this year's Super Bowl between the Chiefs and the Eagles. Are the Chiefs about to go into a lull the way that we saw from the mid-2000s Patriots? It feels like that's at least in play. We'll discuss that next year on 101 ESPN. alongside T-Bone and Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. So the Super Bowl is over. The Chiefs lose, Eagles win. We gave our full thoughts on that yesterday. If you want to laugh at me for my team getting it absolutely handed to them, you can check out the podcast page. 101ESPN.com. The free 101 ESPN app is where you can go to find it. That is up from yesterday's show, so feel free to check it out over there. By the way, you guys can check us out on YouTube as always at youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. Also, go ahead and text in 314-399-9646. That is the Air Comfort Service text line. So the Chiefs have had one of the best 7-year stretches in NFL history. They've been to the AFC Championship game each of the past 7 years. They've been to 5 Super Bowls. They've won 3. That's one hell of a resume, and nobody would argue otherwise. Really, one of the only teams that can compete with that would be the New England Patriots. Now, I think that the best version of the Patriots dynasty, the most impressive part of it, was 2011 to 2018. That 7 to 8 year stretch where they ended up going to 5 different Super Bowls, won 3 of them, and went to the AFC Championship game every single season in that 8-year stretch. Just an unbelievable span of dominance by Tom Brady and the Pats. The reason why I bring that up is because the beginning of that stretch was the continuation of a little bit of a drought for them. Brady won 3 Super Bowls in his first 4 seasons in the NFL. And then he went a full decade without winning one. And he only went to 2 in the next 9 years. From 2005 until 2013, went to 2 Super Bowls and went to the conference championship game, I think it was 4 times. T-Bone, they're the team that everybody compares the Chiefs to. It's, hey, the Chiefs are the new Patriots, right? They're the team that everybody hates. They're the team that the Patriots had Spygate and Deflategate. The Chiefs have the refs, right? Like, so they both got controversies that's surrounding them, and they dominate at a level unlike anybody else in the league. There was a lull there in the middle of that dynasty. Are the Chiefs at risk of going through something similar now over the next 5 to 7 years to what the Patriots did in the middle of the 2000s?
I think they are at risk of it. And I think it comes down to, it feels difficult right now to see where their pivot comes, right? You talked about it after their Super Bowl loss to Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They made a pivot. They kind of go in 3-year increments. And they pivoted. They drafted well defensively, but they reinvested in that offensive line to try and help Patrick Mahomes. And I look at them right now and I go, okay, they need help in the running game. Though the running game was okay in the season in terms of looking at success rate, I wouldn't say it was anything that was to write home about. So you gotta work on the running game. The offensive line clearly needs some help after watching the Super Bowl. And I look at that wide receiver room and I go, man, they have like nothing there. And I mentioned this yesterday. Rice is a nice piece, but he's a number 2 or a 1B for a contending team. You always will want probably somebody to be your 1A. And then defensively, at some point, you're going to have to start paying those guys because they drafted them well. You're probably got, another year, 2 before you really got to start paying those guys. And then you really get stuck into where the cap can become a problem for the Kansas City Chiefs potentially if you start paying all those guys. And Kelsey's getting older, so your number 1 tight end now is clearly not the same guy anymore. I think there's the potential that they do run into the lull. And I think the thing that really played into Tom Brady's lull as the team was kind of going through it, if he wasn't in the NFC now, right? We talked about this yesterday, the NFC looking at Jalen Hurts. Could he be the first quarterback to win multiple Super Bowls? You look at the NFC and Jalen Hurts is the 2nd or 3rd best quarterback in that conference already.
He's the only one that's been to multiple Super Bowls.
Yeah. Nobody else has been to multiple Super Bowls. And the reason I bring up the NFC is because you look at that conference and you go, okay, if the Chiefs were in that conference, if they were in the NFC West, I could see how they could get through this lull, still be fine, still be a team that gets to the NFC Championship game consistently, maybe even get to a Super Bowl. They're in the AFC with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and then you've still got a young quarterback like Drake May that's interesting. Miami's not going to go anywhere with Tua if he stays healthy. Justin Herbert's still really good. Bo Nix, I don't know what his ceiling is, but he was pretty good in his rookie season. The AFC is loaded with good quarterbacks, and I think that's what you saw Brady run into, right? Manning got to 2 Super Bowls in that stretch. Roethlisberger got to 2 Super Bowls in that stretch. The Ravens, they had Joe Flacco, but they had a great defense. Phillip Rivers was always pesky in that conference. That's where I think you can see where they run into that Patriots lull is. It's not just that they're kind of retooling the roster on the fly and they've got a lot of things they've got to fix on that roster. It's, hey, the AFC's not going anywhere. Allen's still going to be around for a while. Lamar's still going to be around for a while. Burrow, that roster could potentially only get better, and I think that's why they can potentially run into this lull.
Yeah, I think they could. I would not predict it. So in that stretch that you're talking about, it was 5 out of 6 years without the Patriots representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. Peyton twice, Ben twice, Ravens once. You could see something similar. I mean, it's possible. Josh Allen could get his. That's the Peyton Manning equivalent. You could have Lamar Jackson get his. Maybe that's your Big Ben equivalent. And then maybe the Ravens are the Bengals or the Texans get to one, something like that. There's a lot of good young quarterbacks in the AFC. I just have too much faith in what the Chiefs have done over the last 7 years to say that they're just going to go through this kind of a lull. They typically find their pivots. Now, I don't know what it's going to look like this offseason. In recent years, when they have this massive upheaval in their loss in the playoffs, you typically know what's coming. In 2018, they lose in the playoffs against the Patriots. Defense got absolutely shredded in that game. They end up firing their defense coordinator. They trade a first-round pick for Frank Clark. They go sign Tyrann Mathieu, and like, wow, okay, now they've completely changed the look of what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball. That was the offseason focus. When they lose against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the postseason, what happened? Well, their offensive line fell apart, but mostly due to injury that year. Eric Fisher got hurt in the AFC Championship game, and Mitchell Schwartz, their right tackle, got hurt earlier in the season. Both of those guys end up leaving or retiring in the case of Mitchell Schwartz, and they have to completely change the look of their offensive line. They go trade a first-round pick for Orlando Brown Jr. They spend a boatload of money on Joe Thuney, spend a second-round pick on Creed Humphrey, and get their now starting right guard who's about to get paid $20 million a year, Trey Smith, in the 6th round of the draft. Well, there's their left tackle through their right guard all in one offseason, overhauled like that. They lose to the Bengals in the postseason. Things had gone stale. The team wasn't the same that it once was. What do? At that point, I didn't know. They traded Tyreek Hill. And they ended up needing this infusion of youth, and they go out there and they change the look of the defense. They reinvest on the offensive side of the ball with cheaper but complementary players at receiver. I don't know what this offseason is going to look like for the Chiefs, but I think they're going to have some kind of a pivot. I think they're going to invest more heavily at left tackle. I think that's the first thing they will do. And then the second thing they'll do, I think they're just going to bring in more solid veterans. I think what we saw this year, and I mentioned it last week, is this going to be a game where it's the best, most well-rounded roster against the holes that the Chiefs have, because the Chiefs had a couple of huge holes on their roster this year, especially in the slot and especially at left guard. Those both showed up in a big way in the Super Bowl. I think they're going to try to maintain a team that has fewer of those gaping holes going into next year. I don't know how they do it, but I think that's going to be the goal going into this offseason. In your opinion, T-Bone, because I think the Chiefs might be on this list for some, who is the most interesting team going into the offseason? Adam Schefter put out his list earlier today over on ESPN.com, and he had the Bengals at number 1, which makes sense. They've got Jamar Chase, who's entering a contract year. T. Higgins is potentially going to be leaving. Trey Hendrickson might become the best or the highest paid defensive end in the NFL. They're a team that everybody's going to be monitoring, especially because of the T. Higgins being the marquee free agent. Who else do you have on that list? Teams that you find most interesting going into the offseason.
So I'm going to go with 2, 1 NFC, 1 AFC. And mine goes with the rookie quarterbacks. Like, I'm fascinated to know what Washington does this offseason. I want to know what their plan is now that you got Jane Daniels, so you hit on him as the rookie quarterback. We've seen this before. We saw what the Texans did last offseason, right? They went into the offseason, and they went big. They spent on their defense. They went out and acquired Stephon Diggs. Now, it didn't really work out for them, but why did they push? They pushed because they had the rookie quarterback that was successful. So I'm interested to know what Washington does, and I'm interested to know what New England does. New England's now hired Mike Vrabel. They've got their quarterback of the future in Drake May, who is really good, and they've got a ton of cap space. Yeah. Like we've talked about it, I could totally see where they talk about like T. Higgins potentially to bring in and help them out offensively. Those two teams are high on my list, and it just goes to, hey, they've got the rookie quarterback. So they've got the perfect opportunity to really start pushing chips in to see if they can get, and especially Washington, really push their chips in a very weak NFC.
I've got a couple as well. The Chargers are one for me. $65 million in cap space. They took their medicine last year, got rid of Mike Williams, got rid of Keenan Allen. They went all in on the offensive line. They have basically built that team now in the image of Jim Harbaugh. What do you do? Are you going to bring back those defensive ends because they were a big piece of what you did this year successfully on the defensive side of the ball? Are you going to invest in the wide receiver position now, or do you keep building up that ground game the way that you did a year ago? The Chargers to me are really interesting, but not necessarily as a Super Bowl contender, just to kind of see what the path looks like. Harbaugh's a great coach. I think Justin Herbert's a good quarterback. They're a team that should be on the rise at this point. But my team, and this was my team all year, and I just want to see the direction that they end up going because they're typically not big spenders in free agency. What are the Packers going to do?
I had them in my top 5.
It's time to really push. You've got a young quarterback. Now, he's not as cheap as the guys on their rookie deals because he signed last offseason for a big-time contract, but they've got a decent amount of cap space right now. The defense is solid. Jair Alexander is almost certainly going to be walking out the door for them. What's their plan? How do they get that number one receiver that they lack to the point where their running back is calling them out at Super Bowl week for not having a legitimate number one wide receiver? The Packers are, to me, one of those teams that I'm going to be monitoring this offseason. So there's a few of those. Packers and Chargers are certainly up there.
Do you find, I know we got to get to a break, do you find San Fran's offseason interesting? And the reason I bring them up is they feel like they're at an interesting spot where they need to pivot. And they've already talked about, hey, Debo, go find yourself a trade. And, like, I don't know how they make that happen because he'd be, like, $30 million in dead money.
He's probably going to end up getting cut.
I think so, too. I find them interesting. They've got $48 million in cap space. I want to know what their plan is going forward because they're clearly ready to pivot, and they're soon going to have to pay Brock Purdy. I find this offseason kind of interesting for what San Francisco is going to do. I don't know if they're top 5. They're definitely top 10, though, for me.
He's Tanner Hendrickson. That's Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. In 15 minutes, we'll get into questions and answers. But coming up next, we're going to get into the state of the franchise with Jeremy Rutherford, our Blues insider for The Athletic here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK, and it is time to unlock your inner champion. The place to do so is at Victory Men's Health. They have 4 great locations across the St. Louis area, and you can check them out today. If you want to learn a little bit more about how they can unlock your inner champion, do so at victorymenshealth.com. Whether it's weight loss goals that you're trying to meet, maybe you have some issues with erectile dysfunction, they can get you on the right side of that over at Victory Men's Health. But the biggest thing they're known for, low testosterone treatments. They can help you out with that. They will test exactly where you're at. There's a healthy range for adult men, and they'll find out where you're at. If you're on the lower end, they'll get you back into that higher end. They can check that out for you over at Victory Men's Health. So the booking of the first appointment, super easy process. Go to victorymenshealth.com. Go up to the top right corner of the page. You'll see the tab that says book now. It's very easy. You put in your name, email, phone number. Tell them a little bit about yourself. Tell them BK with 101 ESPN sent you, and they'll get you all booked up for that first appointment at Victory Men's Health. They're ready to unlock your inner champion today. Do so online at victorymenshealth.com.
Grant Francis here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. News coming out of the NFL today. Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, according to NFL.com, the Saints are finalizing a deal to make them their new head coach. So movement in the NFL. Saints have a new head coach, according to NFL.com. Kellen Moore, Super Bowl champion, going to New Orleans. If you missed anything from TMA earlier today down at spring training, you can go to the podcast page on 101ESPN.com or on your 101 ESPN mobile app. It's presented to you by Schaefer Door Company. You can catch interviews from Victor Scott, Gordon Graceffo, Quinn Matthews, and Lucan Baker. So some great conversations over on the app. And of course, tonight, you can stay tuned after the Fast Lane. Coming up at 7:45, we've got pregame of Creighton and UConn, some men's basketball tonight here on 101 ESPN. I'm Grant Francis. The Sports Center update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline presented by Callier and Thompson to be joined by our friend, Blues Insider for The Athletic. He's Jeremy Rutherford joining us as he does each and every Tuesday on BK and Ferrario. JR, appreciate the time, man. How you doing today?
Anytime, boys. Good.
So let's start with what's coming up, JR. We'll look back here in just a moment. But Four Nations Face-Off starts up this week. What's your level of anticipation for this? I've heard kind of differing thoughts on people in the hockey world on how excited they are about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch. I think anytime it's best on best, it does, bring a different element in the fact that it's not the Olympics. It's not everybody. I know some players from some of the countries who aren't included kind of disappointed. But I think if you're a hockey fan and you look at the lines that Canada put out yesterday and the U.S. put out and Sweden as well, this is going to be some amazing hockey. And I think for the simple fact, too, BK, that, we haven't had the Olympics regularly during the careers of some of these guys, the Nathan McKinnons, the Connor McDavids. So they haven't had a chance to play a lot together. And so everybody who has thought about that, it's just been a fantasy. But now it's going to become reality with this Four Nations tournament.
And JR, speaking of Four Nations, of course, Colton Parayko going to be playing in it. Does it feel like this could be kind of a national coming out party for Colton Parayko? Feel like we talk a lot about him here locally in St. Louis, but I don't know if from a national perspective he gets talked that much about as being one of the best defensemen in the NHL, and yet here he is on Team Canada.
Yeah, I think so, Tanner. The big thing here is he's going to have to play like we've seen him play here in St. Louis the past couple of years. To validate what we're saying about Colton Parayko. I think people who've watched 50, 60 games a year of the Blues the past couple seasons would say that he's been dynamite. But that said, going into this tournament, when they were putting the rosters together, there were some people who I respect who didn't have him on Canada's team. And obviously Doug Armstrong, the Blues GM, has a big say with that committee and who gets invited to the team, and he knows what Colton Parayko brings. So I think it's going to be a great opportunity for Parayko to show some of the naysayers that he does deserve to be on that stage. It looks like he's going to play with Josh Morrissey. With Pietrangelo not there, maybe that gives him a little more responsibility or even ice time. But Colton Parayko certainly has validated himself here in St. Louis, and now it's his chance to do it on that national stage.
All right, Jared, let's get into the Blues. We are now at this break. It's kind of like the trade deadline in Major League Baseball in terms of the timing of it. You get to reassess where you're at as a team, and the Blues go into this break a game under 500. They had that shootout against the Chicago Blackhawks to finish out the first 56 games of the season. 10,000-foot view, how would you assess where this team is at relative to expectations right now, JR?
I would say probably a little less than expectations. I think when we went into the season, we looked at them as a team that could compete for the wild card like they did at times last year if things went pretty well, and they have not gone pretty well. So I think that when you look at the fact that they're 8 points back with 7 games to go before the deadline, the games that they've lost, some of the leads they've let go, the special teams, you just have to look at this and say, well, I thought they could be kind of competitive during the retool, and they have on some nights, but big picture, like you said, 10,000 feet view, it hasn't been the case. So it just kind of proves that I think what some people have thought about this is it's going to take a while, and it's going to take 2 or 3 years, I think, before you can go into a season and say, hey, this team has a legit chance to play for third in the division, to play for that top wild card spot. But as we've seen, it's not going to be this year.
And you mentioned, not getting to wild card expectations. Braden Shen's name's been floating around as we've gotten to this Four Nations break as being on the trade block. Do you think that Army's going to look to do something significant like that, whether it's Braden Shen or trading maybe somebody from this core as we get to the deadline?
Well, the one thing that caught my attention when Doug Armstrong spoke to the media a few weeks ago was the fact that he said it's been the same core for the most part, and they've changed the coach a couple times. They've brought in some support players who've played pretty well when you talk about some of these, third or fourth liners and third pair defensemen, a la Ryan Suter, who've come in and kind of supported the group, but yet it's the same record. And so even though Doug Armstrong had those thoughts, I'm sure prior to speaking to the media a couple weeks ago, he said it out loud. And so I think now when you hear Braden Shen's name in the trade rumors and, the people I've spoken to have heard the same speculation about Braden Shen that he could be available. Let's keep in mind he's got a no trade clause. He's got 3 years left on his deal that's going to take him to age 36. To me, this isn't a move that, can happen quickly or that we'll even see before the trade deadline. Not to say that it can't or won't, but it's likely something that would take some time. I think it's a possibility. And so I think there is probably some truth to it. Now, is there a team who thinks that they're a Braden Shen away from competing for a cup this year? I know Toronto's name's been mentioned with Craig Berube. He's certainly familiar with Braden Shen. They could use a center to come in and help, and we know the intangibles that Braden Shen brings. So there's a lot to like about a Braden Shen who slips into a contending team. But the big question is, are they taking on 3 years, and is Braden Shen waiving that no trade clause?
It's interesting, Jared, on that point. It almost feels like a move that you want to make if you're one of these teams at the deadline, because Braden Shen can help you get over the finish line. To your point on Toronto especially, they need a center. Shen fits the mold, and he plays the style that they would want from that center. And yet, if you're the Blues, what you're probably looking for in return is not a first-round pick. You're not looking for just future assets. You want somebody that kind of comes in the way that Dylan Holloway or Philip Broberg did, and they can immediately contribute in a meaningful way. So for Toronto, that's like a Matthew Nyes, for example. And if you're Toronto, I don't want to get rid of Matthew Nyes because he's helping me compete for a championship this year. And I think that's what makes such a move at the deadline so difficult to come by, is it doesn't necessarily make sense for both sides. It can make sense for Shen. It can make sense for the team that's acquiring Shen. But how do you make it worth the time for the Blues?
Well, you're right. And that's just, another point added to this conversation is, and this is what I was thinking about, when I said that, is that these teams, these contending teams, aren't going to want to give up a contributing player on their roster at this time. And so while they would want, potentially this playoff with Braden Shen and a couple more playoffs with Braden Shen, since he's got that term on his contract, that could be ideal for them. It's not ideal for them to trade a 15, 20 goal scorer, a guy who can play, second, third line for them this year in the playoffs, like a Knives or whomever around the league. So I think that if they can, get through these playoffs, whoever it be, Toronto or a team interested in Braden Shen, without giving up a player like that, then they can go into the off season and make such a move and be able to fill that hole with the player that they move on to St. Louis. Then I think, that's a situation that I could see happening. So you're right. That's a good point. That's another variable in this discussion. But typically trades like this just don't happen at the deadline, as we know.
Jeremy Rutherford is our guest for just another couple of minutes here on 101 ESPN. You can find all of his great work over at The Athletic, and you can follow him on Twitter at JP Rutherford. JR, when you look at the Blues as we get closer to the deadline, they have 7 games remaining prior to the deadline. 6 of those 7 are against current teams that would be in the playoffs if the season ended today. Do you get the sense that the Blues are looking at anything else selling-wise? Are there other members of the core that could start being bandied about in those kinds of conversations? Are there pending free agents? What do you think the Blues are looking to do this year as we get closer to the deadline?
Well, I think he's going to explore everything, and I'm not trying to be cliche.
Sure.
Doug Armstrong, it looks at all those options, but you're kind of limited. Like if you look at that core, and Braden Shen's name has popped up, right? I mean, if it's not Shen out of that core, who is it? Are you moving Jordan Kyrou before the deadline? Is that the type of move? Is that the type of direction that this organization's going right now? It sure doesn't seem like it. A Robert Thomas, a Buchnevich, whose deal doesn't kick in till next year, a Jake Neighbors. I mean, Colton Parayko. I mean, you can go on, and a lot of those guys, even though this team hasn't played well, BK, and they're a couple years off, I think, I don't know that those moves make sense before the deadline. And then if you look at the bottom six forwards, you look at the second, third pair defense, I don't know that those are players that are going to move the needle and teams around the league are going to want. I've mentioned Justin Falk in a recent article. Is there a team out there that would take on a couple more years at 6.5? I don't know that that's the case. Jordan Bennington, I don't think that's the case. So I think their options are limited in that, are they going to move on from a couple of those guys at the top in that core? Shen probably seems to make the most sense along with Justin Falk. I just think that those are going to be complicated deals to make.
So, JR, we keep talking about the core and Army looking at it, whether it be a Shen. I mean, we just talked about Kyrou, Buchnevich, all these guys, and potentially moving on from it. And you said, earlier, hey, it might be another 2-3 years. Remain patient before you potentially talk about this team as going into the year saying, hey, this could be a playoff team. This is only second time, if they miss the playoffs, second time that the franchise would have 3 straight years missing the playoffs. Do you think we're starting to see some pressure mount on Doug Armstrong to try and get this righted before he really hands off the reins to Alexander Steen?
I think he might feel some pressure internally in terms of wanting to get it righted before he hands it off, but I don't think there's any pressure within the organization. And that's a pretty easy thing for me to say because look at the arrangement that they have in place. He's going to step down after next season as GM and fulfill that role as the president of hockey operations, hand it over to Alexander Steen. And as I've mentioned a number of times, Tom Stillman has all the faith in him. He didn't want Doug Armstrong to step down. He had to be kind of talked into Doug backing away from the GM role after next year. But I can tell you this, Doug Armstrong thought this was a playoff team. He brought in Broberg and Holloway not only for the future, but also because he felt that could make this team more competitive. He added to it with the Suitors, the Josephs, the Foxes. He really wanted to bring some veteran stability into this lineup, even though a lot of people were looking to the future because he felt it could be a team that could compete for the playoffs. And now that we see that it probably won't be that team with a lot of ground to make up, and I'm sure he's got a view of this team that he's going to move on and trade parts if there's interest out there. I think that it's going to be very disappointing for him. But outside of him and how the organization looks at him and views at him, I don't think there's going to be any second guessing of Doug Armstrong and what he's trying to do in this last year as GM.
Hey, JR, we appreciate the time as always, man. Enjoy this week off of not having to go out and cover games. You've earned it, my friend. Enjoy the Four Nations face-off. We'll talk with you again soon.
Yep, sure. Talk to you guys later. Thanks.
Absolutely. That's Jeremy Rutherford joining us as he does each and every Tuesday here on BK and Ferrario. Appreciate his time. We will talk more about the St. Louis Blues coming up in the 12 o'clock hour, including what the math says about their chances to get back into the playoff mix. Spoiler alert, it's not good. So we'll get into that coming up in the 12 o'clock hour. But next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. If you guys have any questions, we'll get into those questions and answers here on BK and Ferrario.
You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers on 101 ESPN.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. If you guys have any questions, get them in right now on the Air Comfort Service text line, and we will discuss them here on BK and Ferrario. From the 314, guys, when do you think that we will see Dalibor Dvorsky up at the NHL level? This is a question that we've been getting a ton lately, T-Bone, and totally understand it. He's having a good season at the AHL level points-wise. Grant, I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, but it returns back to what Doug Armstrong has said all along. Whenever he's ready. This is not going to be about what the NHL club needs. You're not adding him into the mix to put you over the top for a playoff spot. That's not where the team's at right now. When Dalibor Dvorsky is ready to come up to the NHL level and stay here and never go back down to the AHL, that's when they're going to bring him up to the NHL level. I don't know when that's going to be. My guess is probably not as soon as a lot of Blues fans would hope. So that's where I'm at. I also don't know that this is necessarily a great situation for him to come into right now. So I thought it would be right around now. I no longer have that kind of belief.
Yeah, I think internally the hope for the Blues is, hey, post-trade deadline, he'll be ready to go. But I think I'm with you. They're not going to rush it. That they probably have a soft deadline in their head of, hey, about post-deadline, we want Dvorsky up here to get some NHL experience. But if we don't think he's ready, we're not going to rush him. Trust me, I'm ready to see him up here. I would prefer Dvorsky to be up here and get playing time because I think it's better for him to be here at the NHL than down in the American Hockey League. But the Blues don't feel that way. They want him to still get seasoning down in the AHL.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. I'd love to see him up here, but again, I don't know how much it helps bringing him up here into a situation that's, a decimated team. That's, the morale's down. I don't know how much that helps. So I'd love to see him up here. I do think at some point you'll see him up here just because I think you want to give him a taste of it before next season, because next season I'd imagine he's going to be here. That's the plan. Yeah. So I think you want to give him a taste of it going into the offseason. That way, come back next year, you're ready. You kind of know what to expect. But I don't think it's going to be a super long, extended run that he's going to be up here. I think they're going to push it off a decent amount of time and then just give him, 6-7 games at the end of the season.
From the 618, guys, now that it has been announced officially that Kellen Moore is going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints, what is your level of concern that Kirby Moore, could follow him? Kirby Moore, Mizzou's offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore, previous OC with the Philadelphia Eagles. It was announced today, as expected, that he was going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. I think it's a real question. I don't know if this is the direction that Kellen Moore is going to go. And T-Bone, you can have your thoughts. I know you've got an interesting thought on this for sure. I think it's very much in play that Kirby Moore follows him to New Orleans. It's his brother. I would imagine there's a decent pull there of, hey, I may never get the opportunity again to work with my brother. This might be the one chance that we have to be on the same staff together, and I'm on his staff. I'm getting to work for my brother, not just with my brother. That's got to be a really unique opportunity for those guys. So I think there's a real chance that it happens. I don't know what Kellen Moore's plans are in terms of play calling. If he is going to be calling the plays, I could see him hiring an OC for a little cheaper, maybe spending that money on his defensive coordinator. Sounds like Brandon Staley's the leading candidate for that. So that would make some sense to me. If he's going, though, to be the CEO version of a head coach, where he's going to have play callers both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball at coordinator positions, I'm not sure you want to go with a guy that's never coached at the NFL level to be the true play caller at the NFL level in Kirby Moore. So I think a lot of this depends on what Kellen Moore wants out of his OC, but I think Kirby is very much a candidate.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to deny that he's a candidate. If I'm Kirby Moore, I'd stay at Mizzou. I think it's a better job than going to the Saints. Kellen Moore was hired, and I know this is true of every job. Kellen Moore was truly hired to be fired. That's a terrible, that might be one of the worst situations right now in football. I mean, it's pretty telling when you get offensive coordinators like Cliff Kingsbury that's like, I'm good. I don't want that job. But I think it will come down to what you said. Does Kellen Moore want to call plays? Because if he wants to call plays, I can't imagine Kirby Moore's just going to give up the opportunity to be a play caller and go work for his brother. And I personally wouldn't want to work with my sibling, at least where he's the head man, So it'll be interesting. I would say right now I would lean 60-40 that he leaves. But I feel a pretty confidence level to an extent that he's going to remain at Mizzou.
Another part of this is, does he want to be in the NFL? Does he like recruiting? Does he prefer the college game? Does it work better for what he wants to do offensively? All of these are legitimate questions to ask, so we just don't know this. But at the very minimum, it's been reported that he's a candidate for a position on Kellen Moore's staff. We'll see where that ends up going. All right, last thing here. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line from the 618. Guys, it seems to me that the Blues are doing the exact same thing that we've been critical of the Cardinals in doing, trying to compete while they're in the midst of a retool. So why is the criticism not as harsh for the Blues as it was for the Cardinals? I think there's a few different reasons for this. The biggest one, and Blues fans are going to get mad at me for saying this, but it's true, the Cardinals are just the biggest story in town. That's the biggest reason as to why the Cardinals get more criticism than the Blues do. Second biggest reason is expectations. The Blues set proper expectations early in the retool. They said, we are going to be taking a step back. This is going to be the direction that we're heading. And then they stuck to that, and they didn't give you unjust hope for the team, right? They didn't sell you something that we all knew was unlikely until this year. This is the first year where I do think that has changed a little bit. Now, it is worth noting, the Cardinals say this stuff publicly. The Blues mostly say it privately. They say it through their actions, and then they'll tell people in back-channel conversations, yeah, we really believe that this is a playoff team. Doug Armstrong hasn't necessarily come out and said that in the public the way that Mo typically does. So I think that's worth noting as well. But I think those are the biggest reasons why. I think the Blues are a little bit better at messaging, and I also think that just in general, they don't get the same amount of criticism as the Cardinals do, because the Cardinals have been the biggest thing in town for 70 years here in St. Louis.
Yeah, I think it comes down to messaging is better, and I think there's just because there's higher expectations no matter what on the Cardinals, right? Like, even if they said this was a retool year, Cardinals fans' expectation would still be, okay, well, we still expect playoffs. And I think that's the biggest difference is Cardinals fans hold a little bit higher of an expectation. And that's not to say Blues fans don't hold high expectations for the team, but I don't think every single year when you go into a Blues season, whether they're in the midst of being a contender or they are in a retool like this, everybody's always going Stanley Cup final, right? And I think that's where it's a little different. Cardinals fans are always, it's not, hey, let's get to the playoffs and see what happens. Like, I think Blues fans can kind of give it off, hey, we've got Bennington, we can steal a series or two. I think Cardinals fans, it's, well, we should be a World Series contender. We're the St. Louis bleeping Cardinals.
Another thing, and this is an important note from the 618. Guys, the Blues also won a cup 5 years ago, whereas the Cardinals haven't won a cup in World Series in 14 years. So I think that also buys you a little bit of time.
I'll add one thing to it, too. I think for the Cardinals, the irritation is more with the front office and ownership and how they go about things. I think with the Blues, the frustration is more with the players, because I think the team has been set up for success this season. Like, I think on paper, this team is a playoff team. The actual reality of it and what we see on the ice, the players aren't putting it together. I think
there's a lot of similarities on the Cardinals that we could get into. I want to do that with you coming up in the.
I think there's similarities, but I do think that.
I think it's a better job of Army than selling it, because Army's the guy who put this roster together and tore apart the Stanley Cup champion core.
I do agree with that. I'm not going back all the way to the Stanley Cup championship and the dismantling of that team. I'm talking about this season right now. I think Doug Armstrong did a good job of putting this team in a position to where it's the players' job now. Like, you have the roster that can compete, at least to make the playoffs. Like, I'm not saying compete for a cup, but the players just haven't gone out and executed. That's where I feel. I put the irritation more on the players with the Blues, and I put the irritation more on the front office and the ownership with the Cardinals.
Fair. I would say the same thing could be true of the Cardinals, though. We don't have to stay on this for too long, but Arenado and Goldie should have been part of that core that gave you those expectations that you're talking about, right? They're better, just historically speaking, than anybody that is currently on the St. Louis Blues. They have a higher ceiling than anybody that is currently on the St. Louis Blues. You also had young players that had a prospect pedigree that were higher, or as high at least, as like a Thomas and a Kyrou, with what you have with Wynn, Walker, and Gorman. So like, they should be expected to be that of the St. Louis Cardinals. So Wilson Contreras is like a Pavel Buchnevich for them. Like, they've got the dudes that the Blues have. I just find it interesting, and I don't know what it is. I think it might be about the sports, and I don't know what it is. It might just be about the likability of Doug Armstrong versus John Mozeliak. That's entirely in play. But I think the rosters are not all that dissimilar, but the expectations are a little bit different, and who gets blamed for the problems are a little bit different in that as well. I want to talk to you more about this coming up later on in the show. But coming up next, one of those young guys that's going to be expected to take a more prominent role for the St. Louis Cardinals this year is Victor Scott II. He was on with TMA earlier today, talked about his struggles last year offensively and why he thinks it's going to be different this time around. We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN. I was reading with Katie Wu's piece over on The Athletic about the key battles leading into this year's Cardinal spring training. She had 3 of them, T-Bone. I think 2 of these, and I'm not disagreeing with Katie, I think these are indeed camp battles. I think 2 of these shouldn't be battles, though. It's the last spot in the rotation between Steven Matz and Michael McGreevy. I think that should just be McGreevy's job. Put Steven Matz into the bullpen. No harm, no foul. Let's see what the young guy can do. At catcher, she has Ivan Herrera versus Pedro Pajes. Again, I agree that will likely be a battle in spring training. I just don't think it should be. Ivan Herrera is a guy that has shown the ability to be a 300 hitter at the major league level. Don't take my word for it. Look at the back of his baseball card. and he has a bat that can play to the point of like 25 home runs. That guy should be your starting catcher, and find out if he can do it defensively. And if not, find a new role for him next year. But to me, those shouldn't really be battles going into spring training, and yet they will be. The one that I do agree with her, and I think that it should be a battle, is center field. Michael Ciani, Lars Nootbaar, Victor Scott are the three names worth mentioning in that battle. I think Ciani comes in as the incumbent. He's probably the leader in the clubhouse, so to speak, for that role. But Victor Scott is a guy that they really liked going into last season. He struggled at a really high degree and did not have the same ability to steal bases at the big league level. It just was a really tough first season for him. He clearly was not ready for this level. But he was on with TMA earlier today, T-Bone, and I loved what he said. And as you're listening to this, think about some of the adjustments that we have not seen from Jordan Walker or from Nolan Gorman or from Dylan Carlson after their struggles. And now think about the mindset that Victor Scott has brought into this year's spring training. Take a listen. This is Victor Scott on TMA earlier today.
I had a lot of success in like a no-stride kind of a stance in 2023, and I thought I was going to be able to bring that to the big leagues and say, okay, this is what I'm going to run with. But then I got there, and they ate me up, man. Like, I mean, they ate me up, man.
It's happened to other people.
Yeah. I mean, it happened. Ended up getting sent to AAA, had to still trying to figure it out down there, and then I had like one of our rovers come up to me and say, man, I think you got to change it. Like, you're probably one of the most athletic guys in the organization, and you're not using it. So how can we use that, and what does that look like for you to be adjustable at that level? Yeah. So I began to implement like a leg kick, try to be more adjustable, and it ended up working out for me. Got called back up after a Ciani injury and was able to show, okay, look, this is what this guy could bring. It was good flashes here, there's good flashes there, so I was just pretty much playing better baseball all around.
All right, T-Bone, I'm going to read you a couple of numbers, all right? This is from two different players in their first opportunity at the big league level.
Okay.
You tell me which one you believed in more after what you saw from the first time around, all right?
This will be cakey. I'm going to fall for something.
All right, option number one.
Oh, boy.
135 plate appearances, a 172 batting average, and a 467 OPS, okay? 172 batting average, a 467 OPS.
Okay.
The second one is in 155 plate appearances, so slightly more, but pretty much the same area.
Yeah.
A 179 batting average and a 502 OPS. Which one did you really believe in more? Was there one that stands out to you between those two?
No, those are both terrible.
One of them is what Mason Wynn did in his first opportunity at the big league level 2 years ago. The other is what we saw last year from Victor Scott. And the reason why I bring up Mason Wynn as the comparison is not necessarily that I think Victor Scott is suddenly going to have the year this season that Mason Wynn did last year, but it's a reminder that sometimes these guys come up when they're unready for the big league level. They get their teeth kicked in. They go down, they make some adjustments, or in Mason Wynn's situation, he goes into the offseason and sees, all right, these are the 5 things that I've got to do to ready myself to be a better player at the big league level next year. He implements all of that, and it works. And the next season, he was awesome, a borderline all-star caliber shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. The same thing could be true for Victor Scott. If you look at their minor league careers and the numbers that they put up down in the minors, they're not all that dissimilar. Mason Wynn and Victor Scott were both really good players down at the lower levels, and then it just didn't work for them the first time around at the big league level. So the reason why I have some optimism about Scott is twofold. One, the talent. It's just there. Like, it's hard. It jumps off the screen. We saw it last year in spring training. Like, it's there. 2, that mentality. The willingness to say what I'm doing is not working and will not work. Because that second part is what's really important. And I think that second part is what Walker has struggled to get to. Walker has made the point of what I'm doing is not working. I think he took a long time to get to the place of what I'm doing will not work. And so his adjustments took a little longer than maybe anybody would have liked. And I think Victor Scott has reached that point quicker. And I do have some hope and some belief that this year he comes back, has those changes that have been implemented. He looks like a different player. Can you be 10% below league average offensively instead of 60% below league average offensively? If you can, that's a starting center fielder that can be here for the next decade.
Yeah, and I'm big on Victor Scott. I mean, you mentioned the mentality there, but not only is it that he had the mentality of, hey, I need to make some changes, He did it in season, and you saw improvements. Now, it wasn't great, but I went back and looked at his numbers from that call-up. He mentioned getting called up when Siani got hurt, which was August 5th. And he gets called up August 5th. He's with the big league club basically for the rest of the season. And he slashes 244, 278 on base, 384 slug, 661 OPS. It's still not great, but it's better than what you read off as what his start was.
It's
to the
passable.
season. It's passable, exactly. Now, you still would like the on base to be a little higher just because then he can use his speed to his advantage and get stolen bases more. But it becomes passable, and passable can win him the starting center field job.
Absolutely.
And that's why I'm in on his adjustments from what we saw last year. I'm big on that idea of, hey, maybe a guy does struggle when he gets called up, but do I see him making changes and making it to where there's slight improvement? And you saw that from Victor Scott last year, when from the moment that it was reported, hey, Ryan Ludwig was the one that was the roving instructor that he mentioned there of, hey, he came down, he had a conversation, he goes more to the leg kick than the toe tap, and you saw some improvement. It's why I was high. Now, granted, this player really went through it last year. It's why I was high when Gorman got called up the first time. Because remember, he would make adjustments. He would go through stretches of, whoa, this looks awful, but then he would adjust, get hot, and then he would get cold again, and he'd get hot again. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in Mason Wynn getting an opportunity in September to go into the offseason and make those changes, and he's able to do that. So I think Victor Scott's a guy that I'm intrigued to see in spring training. I know we talk all about like, oh, spring games don't matter. They really matter for him, and it's about the first step in the outfield, and it's going to be, does the swing look passable? And I think he's going to be a guy, if I had to predict today, I think he will win the starting center field job. I really do believe that.
I think that's best case scenario for the Cardinals.
I agree, because I think he's got the highest upside in that position moving forward.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, if he doesn't win the job, he's down in Memphis. He's not going to be on the big league roster. Whereas Siani, if he doesn't win the job, he's probably your fourth outfielder, and that's fine. You can use him as a defensive replacement late in the game. He's got a role for this team no matter what happens with the starting job in center field. Lars Nootbaar, like, if he doesn't win the center field job, or win it by default, if these other two guys just end up not hitting throughout spring, well, he's going to be your starting left fielder anyways, so he's got a role. The guy that has the most at stake here is Victor Scott, no doubt about it, going into spring training, and I think the Cardinals would love to see him as the starter out there. It also has a trickle-down effect. If Newt ends up in center field, it does open up a lot of flexibility, man, for the rest of your roster. So I think this is the most consequential battle in spring training, even if you view many others, whether it's a bullpen or the last starter spot, or the catcher job, DH, any of these other jobs that have battles, I just don't know how consequential they are, because they could change a week into the season, and it doesn't really change anything else about the way that the roster is manipulated.
Yeah.
Lars in center does. Lars in center allows you to put Brendan Donovan in left field, and then if you still have Arenado here, it allows you to put Gorman at second base, and then it opens up opportunities at either first or DH for Alec Burleson, and now you can get all of those left-handed bats onto the field every day. It also opens up potentially that DH spot against left-handed pitching for one of Contreras or, if you want to do it this way, Herrera with Pages behind the plate. So that is the best probably configuration for this team. But that also requires them to not have Victor Scott hit his way onto the team.
Yeah. And Nootbaar allows them, if they go with him in center, to kind of accomplish the youth movement with Arenado Contreras here. But it's in a different way. Scott still accomplishes the goal, right, of reaching the youth movement to an extent. Now, somebody still is blocked, probably Burleson. Burleson's the one that ends up getting blocked in this case. But then you potentially get answers on Victor Scott. Is Victor Scott the guy of the future in center field? And Chaim Bloom then gets a full look at him for, maybe it's not even a full season, but a 2-month stretch where it is, hey, it's your job, man. Go out there, play your game. You're not going to be, it's about that runway again that we talked about earlier. That's why, to me, like, I hate to say this, but like Siani is like the worst case scenario in center field. And I hate to say that because he was awesome defensively, but you're right. The best case for the Cardinals is, hey, Siani's our fourth outfielder. And honestly, watching him at the plate last year, that's his role moving forward in the big leagues.
And that's okay. This is what I always get frustrated about with the Cardinals. Like Luken Baker, people bring him up occasionally, and he was really good earlier today on TMA. He's a bench bat, guys. He's a bench bat. His role in the big leagues, if he's going to make it in the big leagues for an extended period of time, is to go out there and just mash against left-handed pitching. Come off of the bench late in a game, hit for a little bit of power. That's your role. Juan Yepes. His role is going to be in the big leagues for a really long time to go out there as a right-handed bench bat. There's nothing wrong with that. The overwhelming likelihood, and you've talked about this with Thomas Ajacci, the overwhelming likelihood is Thomas Ajacci, at least for this team, is going to be a utility guy that just moves all around the diamond, probably never going to be a long-time starter for you, but can play a decent role as a right-handed bat, filling in for some of those lefties, especially as you're going up against some of the left-handed pitching that you're going to see throughout the course of the season. So he adds that flexibility. I think the Cardinals sometimes are so afraid to put guys into those roles because it's really hard to succeed in them.
Very.
But if you can't succeed in them, then you can't be in the big league level. So don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Understand that this is going to be that guy's role and just go ahead and sink or swim with it. And I think they get scared of that sometimes, and it pushes them away from bringing some of these guys up to the big league level. They shouldn't. This is the year to go ahead and embrace that. And for Michael Ciani, this is his opportunity for that. Luke and Baker, same thing.
And Ollie seems kind of open-minded to that, right?
Definitely.
I mean, he spoke at winter warm-up. I think it was you that asked him the question about, late game situations like pinch hitting for guys like we've seen them do with some of their younger guys, like Gorman, for example. Like, hey, I don't know, Tanner Scott comes in for the Dodgers late in the game, left on left with Gorman. Well, in a retool, do you let Gorman go against that guy or do you pinch hit? And Ollie did mention, like, hey, Luke and Baker's a guy that, like, that's a spot where he would need to learn to, hey, come off the bench and do that. And you can make a living doing that. I mean, that's what Randall Grichuk has now made his big league career out of, right? Grichuk's not a starting outfielder. He was brought in last year by the Diamondbacks. Hey, you're the right-handed platoon with Jock Peterson.
And there was no market for him. He was amazing last year in that role.
He was
There
awesome.
was no market, so he ends up signing like a $5 million deal.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what's really nice?
$5 million.
A good role for Luke and Baker, making $5 million bucks a year to be that exact player. He's Tanner Hendrickson. That's Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. In 15 minutes, we'll get into what the math says about the Blues' chances to get back into the playoff mix. Spoiler alert, it ain't great. But next, time for Bet It or Forget It here on 101 ESPN.
Vegas sets them up, and we're here to make the call. It's BK and Ferrario's Bet It or Forget It on 101 ESPN.
Presented by Circus Sports Illinois. Sports betting the way it should be.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You guys give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are betting it or forgetting it here on 101 ESPN. Let's start out with this. Dennis Gates is holding his press conference today for the Mizzou media. He was asked about the program that he's building at Columbia, and I'm guessing this was because, hey, there's a job opening up in Indiana. The place where you got your start with Leonard Hamilton down to Florida State's going to be open at the end of this season as well. Are you still committed to Mizzou? What's your vibe check here?
One of those questions that kind of walk the tightrope, eh?
Correct. So his response, quote, I want to be here for 20 plus years. He compared the process that he's building at Mizzou to what Leonard Hamilton built at Florida State and what Norm Stewart was able to build at Missouri, both of whom spent decades building up their respective programs. So my question to you based on this, T-Bone, bet it or forget it, Dennis Gates will reach a Final Four in his time at Missouri.
I will forget it. I think he can become a consistent tournament team.
Sure.
But Brad Underwood's done that, and he hasn't gotten to a Final Four yet. And that's why it just goes to show how hard it is to get to a Final Four. And maybe I'm just a sucker, but I feel like every year I keep going, oh, this team is so much better than last year's, and Underwood still hasn't gotten to a Final Four. He's gotten to the Elite Eight. That's the farthest he's gotten. He ran into a buzzsaw in UConn. So I will forget it just because it is so hard to get to the Final Four.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't think Leonard Hamilton ever reached a Final Four. I think he got to the Elite Eight, and I think that was the furthest that he was ever able to get in his time at Florida State. Let me make sure on that. Yeah, the round of the Elite Eight was the furthest that he's been. He did that back in 2018. So he would potentially have to go further than what Leonard Hamilton did. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to bet it.
Oh, God.
I'm going to have the optimism. I don't know that it's going to be this year, but what he constructed this year with his roster really makes me hopeful for the future. And it does. I have some revisionist history as to what happened last year now. After seeing what Caleb Grill is, that guy's a stud. That guy's a really good basketball player. John Tonje is the best player on a pretty darn good Wisconsin team this year. If you had those guys a year ago and both of them missed almost the entire seasons due to injury, everything else changes about the look for that team. I don't know that they make the tournament, but they would have been a hell of a lot better than going over in SEC play.
They would have won a game.
So I do think that he is a good talent evaluator. He's shown an ability to make guys better as well. He knows what it looks like to be a good team. So I'm going to say bet it. I do think he ends up getting to a Final Four at the University of Missouri. T-Bone?
Guys, bet it or forget it. We've seen the relief market start to move a little bit today. We saw Kenley Jansen sign with the Angels. Scott Barlow went to the Reds. There's still plenty of big-name relievers out there. Bet it or forget it. We will see the Cardinals sign a reliever. I don't even want to say before opening day. Yeah, before opening day.
I think they'll sign a reliever. I don't think it'll be in that category. Like a Kenley Jansen, I don't think they're going to give anybody more than $4 million.
Be more than the Barlow. He got 2.5 from the Reds, I think
that's more the range that I think they'll be interested in. I think they will bring somebody in. I think they first want to see, though, what the situation is with their rotation. Because if they end up having to put Steven Matz into the bullpen because McGreevy just outpitches him, that might take that spot that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I would forget this. Because I would think they would have done this before already, right? They have a revisionist history. We know how the Cardinals like to look at one time where a good process failed and never go back to it. What I'm referencing is Greg Holland, right? We're at the point now where, hey, pitchers and catchers report, like they technically report tomorrow for the Cardinals. And we saw them fail with Greg Holland when they brought him in late. We're at that point now.
You were a big Dylan Floro guy last year, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's still out there.
And he'll probably get around that $2.5 to $5 million. I just don't think they'll do it now. I think we've seen that it's very hard for pitchers if they get a late start to come in and have an effective season. And I think they'll get to the point where if they are still waiting on, like, hey, let's figure out what we're going to do with Matt. Oh, let's see if we clear more money if this Arenado sweepstakes goes on. It's taking too long. And I think they're just at the point now where they'll say, we'll just go with our internal options. And if we have to fix it in season, we'll fix it in season.
You know who I would sign? Craig Kimbrell.
I think he'll get $10 million.
I don't. Last year he had a 5 ERA. He couldn't throw strikes. He walked 5 batters per 9 innings. Like, I don't think a contender is signing Craig Kimbrell. I think he will have to sign with somebody that is not expecting to be a contender. And then the hope is he pitches his way into the plans of somebody at the deadline. I think he is this year's potential Aroldis Chapman, where the Royals a couple of years ago signed him with the belief that they would be trading him at the deadline. Craig Kimbrell could be that for you this year. That's what I would do if I was the Cardinals.
And, like, that's why Scott Barlow would have made sense, because look at Scott Barlow's profile. He strikes out, I think it's like 10 per 9. He also walks 5 per 9 as well, and that's why he got the deal he got.
All right, guys, bet it or forget it.
Did you break your microphone over there?
I think so. The national negativity surrounding Colton Parayko ends after the Four Nations tournament.
Man, this is an interesting one. I think this will go one of two ways. There is no in between, in my opinion. I'll say bet it. I do think that he ends up performing really well in this kind of a tournament. This has always been his MO. Takes the regular season seriously, don't get me wrong, but he really raises his game when the stakes are high. It's why I had every expectation to be great in the Winter Classic. I think you will see something similar in the Four Nations face-off where he looks great. In Canada, they would be my pick as of today to win this whole thing. I think he ends up winning it for them in the starter's net. And so, yes, that will gain him some appreciation nationally. But if he looks in the tournament the way that he has for much of this regular season, he's going to get pulled, man. They'll end up going to Aiden Hill or one of their other options in net. So in that scenario, oh boy, then it's not only does he not get the credit that he deserves, then it becomes people start looking down on Jordan Binnington even more than they already did.
Did I say Jordan Binnington or Colton Parayko?
You said Parayko. He's
bad.
talking about
I thought I was talking about Parayko.
I will say this.
I'm interested
I
on both.
apologize. I just had a really long answer to a question that wasn't asked.
It's fine. I was going to follow up
about
with
Binnington in the commercial break.
Yeah.
But I think, you said it goes one of two ways, right? I think it's the same for Parayko.
Parayko, I think yes. My answer to your question will be very quick. Yes, I think he gets more credit.
I think the same can be true of Parayko, though, too, because JR said it when we talked to him, right? Like, there are some people that didn't think Parayko was going to be on Team Canada. And that is more of a Doug Armstrong poll of, hey, I see this guy every night. I'm telling you, this guy, the link that he brings, he may not be viewed as a number one defenseman in the NHL. He's going to make it a living hell on all these players at this Four Nations tournament, the link that he brings. But I could totally see where Parayko has a bad tournament. It swings the other way from a national perspective of, wait, why did we bring Colton Parayko when there were other options that Canadian fans wanted? So I will bet that he has a good tournament, and I'm going to bet the same thing with Jordan Binnington as well.
Here's a good question, because I was going to ask this follow-up. Who do you think comes out of this tournament from a national perspective, again, looking better, Binnington or Parayko?
Parayko. I don't think Parayko is going to fail. I don't see any scenario where Parayko looks terrible out there. He's a good player, great skater. He's going to be playing with fellow really, really good players on the blue line. So I don't think Parayko is going to be a problem for them. Binnington, man, I have no idea. I think he's going to show up, but he has not played well recently. So.
I think people are going to be fast to blame him, too.
Absolutely.
Oh, 100%.
And it's easier to blame a goalie than it is a defenseman,
sure.
right?
For sure.
What are you taking that from experience here in St. Louis?
Just... a second pair defenseman in Colton Parayko, potentially a third pair defenseman, depending on how things end up shaking out for them. I don't think he's going to draw the ire of Team Canada. If Binnington allows 3 to 4 goals in a game, he absolutely will. All right, let's get some of these from the text line. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. Guys, bet it or forget it. The Cardinals outfield this season will not have a single player that hits more than 15 home runs. I'm forgetting this. I think Lars Nootbaar will hit more than 15 home runs at a minimum.
Yeah, I'm going to forget this too. Nootbaar had 12 in 109 games. Hell, Donovan had 14. Now, I don't know if you're going to call him an outfielder or not in this scenario, but I will forget this as well. I can see Nootbaar getting there if he can stay healthy, play 145, 150 games. He'll be a guy that gets to about 20, so I'll forget this.
That's going to be the key is the health thing.
Definitely.
And I
been
guess
working
you just
on it
got to hope
twice.
on that one. So I'll bet it too. I mean, if Lars can stay healthy, I can see it. It's just that's what it comes down to.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line from the 972. Guys, there's been a lot of talk about it. Make your call. Bet it or forget it. Shin will be moved at the deadline. I'm going to forget it. It's too big of a deal. Too many years left. Too hard to come up. If the Blues were tanking, I think it would get done. I think somebody would send a first-round pick for Braden Shin if the Blues were willing to eat some of the salary. Given where they're at, given the fact that they want a real roster player in return, I don't think that's a move that ends up getting done at the deadline. Maybe in the offseason. I do not think at the deadline.
Yeah, I'm going to forget it too. I don't think he gets dealt. I think it's twofold for me. One, it's the contract. I mean, you mentioned it. 3 more years, $6.5 million that you got to move on top of including this year. And the second for me is whether it is the Blues looking for that player that you're talking about, looking for a player that can help their roster. I think they're asking for too much for Braden Shen, if I'm being totally honest. And I don't think they're going to get that. We keep hearing mammoth return or huge return in all these reports. I don't think the Blues are getting that for mid-30s center. So I'm going to forget this. I don't think they're moving him.
I'm going to forget it too, but I do agree with Elliot Friedman that Vegas becomes interesting. And the reason why is because they don't give a damn if you've been there since day one. If they want a player, you are going to get traded if that's what it takes.
Definitely.
So I don't think it's going to happen at the trade deadline. I could see, again, more probable in the offseason. But if it comes down to Vegas and Vegas wants him, they'll move what they have to in order to get him. So I think it's going to be either Vegas or no, though. And I'm going to lean no.
He's Grant Francis. That's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex is out this week. He'll be back in with us next week, taking some much-deserved vacation this week with the Four Nations face-off. Blues not playing. Coming up next, speaking of the Blues, what does the math say about their chances to get back into the playoff mix? Spoiler alert, it ain't great, but we'll talk about how they can do it next year on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. The news out of the NFL today, according to NFL.com, the Saints are finalizing a deal with the Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore to become their new head coach. So the Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator looks like he's heading to New Orleans to be their next head coach. Then for the Cardinals earlier today over at spring training, TMA down there. If you missed any of the conversations they had with Victor Scott II, Gordon Graceffo, Quinn Matthews, Lucan Baker, you know, is go to the podcast page on 101ESPN.com or on your 101 ESPN mobile app, presented by Schaefer Door Company. Check out those great conversations TMA had earlier this morning. Tonight here on 101 ESPN, you can stay tuned for some men's college basketball. Creighton and UConn tonight. Pregame at 7:45 and tip-off at 8 o'clock. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Alongside T-Bone and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. So what does it mean, or what would it take for the Blues to be able to get back into the playoff mix? Obviously, it's unlikely. Today, as of today, the Blues would pick 8th in the NHL draft. 3 points back of the 5th overall selection, 6 points back of the 4th overall selection, or at least the 4th best odds to win the NHL lottery. For context, they're currently 8 points back of the second wildcard spot and 13 points back of the top wildcard spot. So you're much closer currently to a top 4 selection in the NHL draft than you are a playoff spot. So, again, that's worth noting, and it's why most of the conversation over the course of the next few weeks is going to be about what the Blues decide to do at the deadline and how they can sell their assets, because it feels very unlikely that they end up in the playoffs. But it has happened before. The Blues right now are through 56 games of the regular season. And if you were to look at teams in the last 20 years that had 25 wins or fewer at this point in the regular season, as the Blues do, that ended up making the playoffs, there have been 9 of them. 25 or fewer wins, 56 games through the regular season. There have been 9 of those teams in the last 20 years. So how'd they do it? What did those teams do? Well, 2 of them ended up getting into the playoffs with 87 and 88 points. That's the 2016 Wild and the 2010 Canadiens. The NHL is not down like that this year, at least not in the Western Conference. You're not getting into the playoffs this season with fewer than 90 points. So let's eliminate them, look at the other ones as our guide. So that leaves 7 teams. It does include one Blues team, by the way, 2009. The Blues went 17-6-3 down the stretch, finished with 92 points that season, and did end up making it to the NHL's playoffs. Points in 20 of the last 26, won outright 17 of those games. That is the common theme. Out of the other 7 teams, excuse me, that were able to do what the Blues are trying to accomplish here, they all won at least 16 of their last 26 games. Every single one of them. And many of them went like 16 wins in regulation, 5 losses, and then like 5 games that ended up going to overtime and lost. The amount of games where you've got to find a way to get points down the stretch, it's like 20 plus. And you got to win at least 16 of them. It's like 16, 6-4. That's the kind of record that the Blues are going to have down the stretch. That means multiple big-time winning streaks. That means winning like 7 out of 8 at some point in time as well.
You're feeling that.
I say all of that to say this. This team ain't making the playoffs, man. It's over. It's time to face reality that this is just, it's not a good enough team. They dug themselves too big of a hole. And so at the deadline, as I'm sure Doug Armstrong has somebody in the front office that as they're going through this week and they're looking at, okay, where are we at, guys? What is our plan as we are now a couple of weeks away from the NHL's trade deadline? How do we approach this thing? Tell me my odds of making it to the playoffs. Tell me my odds of getting into the top 5 of the NHL draft. Where are we at, everybody? There's somebody in there that's a super nerd that's looking like me, and he says this is what your path is, and it's very rare to be able to meet this criteria. When you guys hear that information laid out in front of you on what it would take for this team to get back into the playoff mix, your reaction is what?
Kind of like what yours was, which is, hey, this isn't a playoff team. they don't have this kind of run in them. I mean, they haven't even won 3 straight games yet. Think about that. They haven't won 3 straight, and what you just said was, hey, if you got to win like 20 of those games in regulation, 15 of those games in regulation.
Got to get at least 16 based on these in regulation.
That requires winning streaks. And this team hasn't gone on one. And they didn't even play well against the Blackhawks going into the break. I know they won that hockey game. That was ugly. And that was not a great performance from a team that you think about that, oh, hey, maybe there is still hope. They just don't have this in them. They're not a playoff team. And
they haven't won 3 games in a row, man.
And if you haven't won 3 in a row at this point, why am I going to believe you're going to win 3 at some point, right? They'll probably do it because even the crappy Blackhawks have done it. But I just don't see it for this team. And you're only going to get worse potentially from the deadline if you are going to sell off assets. This isn't a playoff team. Now, when you talk about the St. Louis Blues moving forward, it's about the future. It's about what is going to be the answers long-term in this retool. When is Dalibor Dvorsky going to get here? When will Jimmy Snuggerud get here when they get eliminated or if they win it all for Minnesota? It's all about the future now than it is about the 24-25 season.
Grant, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I don't really have any hopes for playoffs anymore this season. It's just... it hasn't worked out for the team, and I was actually thinking about this the other day. If they went 26-0 on the season, not 26 wins, 20 wins, 6 losses.
Okay.
They're at 95 points. Last year, it took 98 to make the playoffs. Yeah. The year before, it took 95. So you're talking about if you go on
That's roughly what you're looking at.
20 wins, 6 losses run, you might get in. It's just not going to be enough. Again, like you said, T-Bone, like for a team that hasn't gone on a 3-game win streak all season, that's going to be a tall task. And you mentioned the 2009 run. I believe that was the Chris Mason year, correct? Mm-hmm. Where he came in, went on an incredible run. Like, you don't really have a new goaltender coming in this season unless the goaltending just goes on an insane run, which, I mean, you don't really see that considering the fact that those goaltenders have been here all year and it hasn't happened.
Ryan in the YouTube chat brings up what is typically the case for the Cardinals where, hey, we get into August and it's like, hey, the Cardinals are out of it, right? Guys, think about 2011. Think about 2006. We've seen this before. He brings up 2019, right? Where were the Blues at this point in 2019? The answer is they had 63 points on the season through the first 56 games, which is better than where you're at right now. They'd also won 8 straight. They were in the midst of an 8-game winning streak. And prior to that, they had won 3 games in a row. So you had a stretch where you had won. It's like I'd have to do the math on air, which is always a risky thing to do. But you're talking about winning 12 out of your last 15 games. That's the kind of thing that the Blues would have to do from here on out. And that Blues team, by the way, then went on another 1-4 out of 5, 1-4 consecutive, 1-4 out of 5. Like the Blues had an 11-game winning streak and then had more stretches down the end of that season where they were playing really high-level hockey and winning games and getting points in overtime as well. So, yeah, this team, I just don't know how anybody can convince themselves at this point that they have that level of hockey in them.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe.
Not to mention the fact, like, their schedule's not exactly easy coming out of the Four Nations break. Like, you look at their schedule coming out of the Four Nations, you got Winnipeg, Colorado, Seattle, Washington,
6 of the
LA,
next 7
Dallas,
are against
LA.
teams that are currently in the playoffs. That's prior to the deadline. 6 of your next 7.
That's tough. If you're going into that stretch saying, okay, it's time to put together a run, like, you're not exactly going into your easy part of the schedule where you can sort of make hay. Like, those games are going to be difficult to just get one win.
And I know right now, Doug Armstrong's not going to be making these moves like during the break, right? But he's talking to people. And they're kind of going back and forth on, hey, what would a potential offer look like here? What is potentially available? This is the perfect time to have those conversations because you do have this break for the next couple of weeks. And I wouldn't be surprised if Army does stuff prior to the deadline. We saw this a couple of years ago when the Blues knew, hey, we're going to be sellers. And they tried to go on that little mini run, and Army was like, no, we're trading Ryan O'Reilly. Yeah. This is not happening. We're not going to go out there and do the thing that convinces us to buy or to stand pat. No, this team is not good enough. It's not going to win anything of meaning in the postseason. We're selling now, a week prior to the NHL trade deadline. I think this could be the type of year where you see something similar. And Army gets hyper aggressive, and he beats the market, and he ends up selling off some of those assets prior to the NHL trade deadline.
Yeah, and I could 100% see that as well. And I was going to bring up, you've brought this up before too, BK. Like, this team doesn't have, they're missing 2 things. One, they don't have a star. And are superstar, and two, they're just not elite at anything, right? Like you go back to that 1920 team, for example. I don't know if you'd say that team had a superstar. Ryan O'Reilly was a star, really good, shutdown center. Vladdy was still a really good player, but I don't know if he was in that superstar category anymore at that point in his career. But they had an elite power play. Their power play that season finished third in the NHL in power play percentage at 24.3%. The Blues don't have something like that.
Are you talking about 2019?
Yeah, that
They
2019
also had
team.
elite goaltending.
Well, yeah, that too. They had elite goaltending. But like
They had an elite
had two
player.
things that they could really rely on. Hey, we're getting goaltending and an elite defense that's going to stop the opponent.
Correct.
But somehow their PK wasn't very good, which is odd. But they also had a power play. Like they may not have been great at 5-on-5 in terms of, hey, we got one line or one player that we can say, hey, get out there and get us a goal, like the Oilers we saw when they came to town, where they said, hey, McDavid Draisaitl, go just be awesome. They had a power play that they could turn to when
And
needed.
beyond that, they're just an elite goal suppression team. They had unbelievable defense. They were all tree trunks, and they had a goaltender that was standing on his head for 3 months of the season up until the postseason, and then he did it again. Like that's what the Blues were elite at. The Blues were the LA Kings. Like they were the team that you just can't score against them. And then they have that elite power play unit. So good luck at 5-on-5. Then we're going to get our opportunity to go on the power play. Now we win. Game over. Like that's it. So yeah, that team is not comparable to what we're watching right now. They're not at similar points in their respective life cycles as an organization.
Well, and the one thing too, just to go back to the 2019, 2009, the one common denominator there is what, like you said, you had elite goaltending. And if you are going to put together any sort of run that maybe puts you in the conversation of, okay, you could see it, you got to have elite goaltending.
No doubt. He's Grant Francis. That is Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. By the way, if you do want to watch some of the Blues that are participating in the Four Nations Face-Off or hear them, you can listen to those games right here on 101 ESPN. Canada versus Sweden is going to be on 101 ESPN tomorrow night. Pre-game for that one will begin after the fast lane at 6 o'clock. And on Thursday, we'll have the U.S. versus Finland. So all of that right here on 101 ESPN this week. No Blues hockey, but we do have hockey for you on the radio. Coming up next, I was legitimately embarrassed with my conduct yesterday. I want to explain it to you guys, tell you exactly what happened, and I want to hear on a scale of 1 to 10 how bad of a dad I was. Coming up next here on 101 ESPN. All right, T-Bot, I wish Alex was in here for this segment, not because I don't like having you in, but because Alex would understand the position that I was in yesterday. I need a ruling. It's a segment that we used to do with Anthony Stalter when it was Stalter and Rivs. I need a ruling on my behavior yesterday at my house because I think it was unacceptable.
All right.
So
I'll try and help.
We have an issue in our living room right now, or had an issue in our living room. Our ceiling fan, it had these like LED lights, and I'm not talking about the bulbs. I'm talking about like an LED plate that was at the bottom. That's what that's what the light was constructed from. Now, the ceiling fan company, the manufacturer of it, has since gone out of business. It was in place whenever we moved into the house, and we've never had any issues with it, so we just left it in place, right? Why mess with it? So about 2 or 3 days ago, it no longer works. I'm like, okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll get a new light replacement. I'll just put it up in there. I know how to do that. I'm pretty incompetent with most of the stuff around the house, but I could figure out how to put a new light in. Well, no, couldn't do that because none of them fit. It's just not it's not compatible with the current light structure that we had there. So we have to get a new fan. So we go to Home Depot yesterday. We get the new fan. It's like, all right, I've put in a new fan before. This is typically a pretty simple process. You've got a couple of wires that you connect to the fan and then just put it in place. It's ready to go, right?
Okay.
That's what I thought the process was going to be. That started at roughly 7 o'clock last night. I should have known better. It ended in disaster. So I thought it was going to take like an hour, and then we could eat dinner, do whatever. Well, I'm about an hour in, and at this point, Kara's like, let's just go ahead and order in, blah, blah, blah. So we end up ordering in. That's the first thing that I got wrong. Shouldn't have started it early. Then now I'm getting frustrated because I can't figure out what to do. I call my dad. You know that moment where you're like, I can't do this. I'm incompetent. I have to call somebody that
And I really don't want to make this phone call.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you have to make it. So I call my dad who does contracting work by trade. So I'm like FaceTiming him, showing him what the wire situation looks like above me. He's like, yeah, man, like this should be super easy. Take this wire and connect it to that wire and that wire. I'm like, Dad, I did that. It's not working. And at this point, I'm just fuming. We're like 3 hours in. It's like 10 o'clock at night. And I've gone up and down with the breaker, turning it on and off, trying this and that. They apparently like completely redid the wiring above our ceiling fan to get this old thing to work and switched up which ones would and wouldn't work and changed the colors of them and everything. So to make it a long story as short as humanly possible, I lost my cool. I was not okay, and I was radiating so much negative energy that by the time that we ate dinner with Luca, he came over to me, put his hand on my lap, and just gave me like a huge hug and then started like patting me on the leg to be like, it's gonna be okay, Daddy. I've never been more embarrassed in my entire life. Kara was like, a couple hours later after Luca went down, she's like, you do understand that wasn't okay, right? Like the fact that your son had to come up to you and try to console you because you were so frustrated by a ceiling fan. That is not okay. I need a ruling.
Are you trying to defend your actions right now?
No. On a scale of 1 to 10, how problematic is that?
Well, okay, so...
Do you lose your cool when you're trying to fix stuff and it's not going your way? Because that's my problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
I start cursing under my breath, but granted, I don't have a little one in a home that might emulate me cursing under my breath. Well, it doesn't sound like any anger got like it wasn't unforced towards him, towards Luca. Like Luca did something that like typically you'd be like, you know, a little upset by, but you wouldn't really yell. And then like he did it, and then you're like, what the F was that?
Exactly.
So, you know, I'm not going to give you too bad of a score here. On a scale of like 1 to 10, I'm going to go...
I feel like it was like a 6.
I was going to say 6. I was going like 5 or 6.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range.
I mean, you didn't direct any of your negative energy towards...
Yeah, like if you went like at Luca on something, I would have been like 12.
Sure, yeah. Nothing was thrown.
Yeah.
Obscenities were definitely said.
Yeah, well, you know, they happen.
There was obvious frustration. I'm like over there shaking. Yes. Because you got to hold up the fan in one hand and you're trying to work the wiring with the other.
You know what?
Absolute disaster. I will say, figured it out by about 11:45 last night. We had a working ceiling fan in our living room.
So it took then how many hours?
About 5.
Okay. It's funny you were doing that because you know where I was yesterday? Now, granted, I wasn't cursing anything, but I went to my grandparents' house yesterday. I got there about 5 o'clock because my uncle was in town, and I got there at 5, and they were working on fixing their doorbell because their doorbell wasn't ringing.
Sure.
And it took three of us, me, my two uncles, and then their cousin ended up he was in town for work, came by because his mom was just recently there and left stuff there. So he came by. So there were four of us that worked on a doorbell. And we worked on that from 5 o'clock until 8:30.
Yep.
And it took us 3.5 hours to fix a doorbell. And it turned out the whole reason that it took so long was we ended up having the wires crossing at the door when you're supposed to put a piece that we put on the ringer.
Basically flipped it.
We flipped it. And we did everything for 3 hours. We couldn't figure out why. And then we finally figured it out. And it took 5 minutes to get it fixed.
Yeah. I was furious last night, boy. Oh, buddy. We're doing the basement here pretty soon. My dad's going to be in town for that, thank God. So that'll be a huge help. But
I've seen maybe not that angry, but I've seen your dark side.
it doesn't come out very often. It's a rarity, but boy, did it come out last night.
See, I don't really get the sense that it's that bad.
I don't like being around him when he's it.
Maybe I'm just not picturing how mad you were, but as long as you weren't directing that towards anybody else, then I don't really see that big of a problem.
He just gives off enough energy to where you don't want to be around.
I know there's a lot of tone
100%,
involved.
That's exactly correct. No, it's mostly a shutdown mode. It's less about me directing it towards others and more about you can just tell when I'm angry.
Now he will be willing to direct it at you. I've seen that too.
Not my son though. I would never do that with Luca, but it's just more of a bottled up energy of this is gonna get released and I don't know how and I need it to stop.
Yeah, and you can tell he's angry, so you don't want to talk to him, even though you probably have to because you're working with him.
And I think that's where Luca was at, where he's like, "Dad, you're good, man. Chill. We got a ceiling fan. It's all good." So, anyways, that was my night last night. It wasn't as bad as my situation with the garbage disposal, but it was a pretty close second. There was a point in time where I asked my dad. I said, is it possible that it's the fan that's the problem? Where all of these wires are working correctly and it's the fan that is an issue? Because if so, I'm going to lose my mind. If I've spent the last 4 hours on this thing and it's just a faulty fan that can't end up going up. So anyways, that was my evening last night. An absolute disaster. Hopefully you guys have all been in that spot before. I certainly was yesterday. With Grant and T-Bone on BK. Coming up next, the Cardinals sent a clear message at the beginning of the offseason, but have they lived up to their own expectations? We'll talk about that next here on 101 ESPN. All right, the Cardinals sent a clear message at the beginning of the offseason, but have they actually lived up to what they were trying to sell to you as a fan? Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. The Cardinals' message at the beginning of the offseason was we're going young. It's a youth movement. We're going to take a step back because we believe that it is in the best interest of our team over the long haul to build once again what they think can be a consistent contender in the National League. And they viewed it at the time as this is the only way for us to be able to accomplish that goal. And beyond that, we need to get answers on the young guys in 2025 in order to really learn what we have there, because that's also going to inform our future decisions. So, T-Bone, that was the message at the beginning of the offseason. As of today, they have added exactly 0 big league players to the roster via free agency. They added 1 technically to their 40-man roster via trade. They haven't really done a lot with the roster that was in place other than allowing players to go that were already scheduled to hit free agency. They have not moved on from Nolan Arenado or Ryan Helsley or Eric Fedde or Sonny Gray or Miles Michaelis or Steven Matz or any of the other players that they potentially could have had some kind of a return from. And so now it is still open into question as to what the runway looks like for some of these young players that you thought you were going to be able to see at the beginning of the year. So how would you say their actions have gone relative to what their words were at the beginning of the offseason?
I would say that they have failed with their actions to play to what their words were saying of, hey, we want the youth movement. And though, again, I don't think this youth movement would have been a team that would have been a playoff team, but I could have gotten on board with it of what they're trying to do. Well, if that's the case, then you make some of these moves. One of Matz or Fedde should have been traded this offseason then, so there is no temptation to put them in the rotation, and you can lock in a Michael McGreevy or a Gordon Graceffo, whoever it is that might end up, McGreevy most likely, but you can lock them into the rotation, right? That way when we enter camp tomorrow, when pitchers and catchers report, Michael McGreevy knows, I'm a starter, not the potential of I'm going to be a swingman. You would have them talking about whether it was they move on from Nolan Arenado and they would eat more money, which apparently is a big holdup according to Jeff Passan.
Sure.
They make that move happen, right? It is done. You eat whatever money is necessary to make this trade happen, especially since ownership has said, hey, if Arenado were here, we're good on our budget. Okay, well, then we should be good to eat money and really get this youth movement kicked off by having a Nolan Gorman at third. And then that allows for Brendan Donovan to be at second. Oh, and by the way, that allows for Alec Burleson to be the DH. Or if Arenado is here, which currently is slated to be, they would be completely open-minded to Nootbaar being in center field. And based on the way that things have been written and reported, it doesn't sound like they have a plan for that. It doesn't sound like they want to go with Nootbaar in center field. They want to keep him in a corner because they believe it keeps him healthier. Okay, well, if that's the case, and here we are again where Arenado's getting his 600 plate appearances at third. First base is Contreras. Donovan or Gorman's at second. Then the other one's at the DH. And now Burleson's blocked from getting plate appearances. Their words were nothing more than just words right now because they had no actions to follow it. And that is very frustrating because I can get on board with the youth movement for the Cardinals. Then do it. Show the actions and go make stuff happen. And they haven't done any of it. It's a very Cardinals offseason where it is, we talked about it earlier, it is the path of least resistance. It's very stagnant, and it remains to be what they are, which is stuck in the middle.
And it is worth noting, they tried. They did have a deal in place to send Nolan Arenado to Houston. And then Arenado said, nope, not happening. So if the Cardinals had anybody in here talking with us right now, that would be their retort, I would assume, is, hey, we did the thing that we said that we were going to do, and then Arenado ended up saying no. Kind of similar to what Doug Armstrong would say if, hey, I tried to trade Torrey Krug. He said I couldn't do it, and what do you want me to do? My hands are tied. I gave him the no-trade clause. He ended up exercising it. Same thing happened with the Cardinals here. The difference is Krug said, I'm not leaving. It wasn't I'm not just that I'm not going to Philly. It was I'm not leaving and there's not really a place out there that's interested in me that I'm willing to go to.
Yeah.
Arenado has stated to the Cardinals that there are places that he's interested in going in. It just wasn't Houston at that particular time, which ended up meaning it's not Houston. It sounds like Boston's interested in him. Sounds like New York might be interested in him. And he's interested in both of those spots, according to reports out there. At a certain point, you just have to get it done. I know that everybody's waiting for Alex Bregman. We don't know when that's going to come to a conclusion or if that's going to be anytime in the near future. To me, what's happened with the Cardinals this offseason, and you went through a lot of the individuals, they're taking this as a player-by-player approach as opposed to looking at it holistically of how do we build a good team? How do we build not just a team for 2025, but beyond? And this has been a little bit of their issue in previous seasons as well. They'll say, okay, we want this player. Let's bring him into the mix. It's kind of what the Padres used to do, where, yeah, you collect good players, but you don't end up with a good team. And I think that's something that the Cardinals have fallen into the trap of is, okay, we really want to be a good defensive team. Cool. What's that look like? Because if you go with that approach, you end up with probably Ciani in center field and Pedro Pages behind the plate and maybe Alec Burleson at first base and Contreras at DH. But then where am I playing Nolan Gorman or Brendan Donovan in that scenario? What does that mean for Jordan Walker in right field? Like, they have these philosophies that don't align with their personnel. And if they don't align with their personnel, don't you have to move guys in order to make that possible? It's a weird fit. It's the island of misfit toys again, which is what they were 5 or 6 years ago. And they seem to have kind of reverted back to that.
Yeah. Oh, and I don't know if they ever really got away from it, right? Like, think back to that what was the Pujols year? 22 year? Like, Juan Yepes was a great bat for that team. Where the hell was he playing?
Yep.
Like, they didn't have he wasn't going to be at first because he had Paul Goldschmidt. He clearly was not an outfielder because I remember in spring training Ollie being like, yeah, he's out there. He may not catch the ball, but he's out there. Yeah. So they didn't really have a position for him. Burleson, when he originally got up here, wasn't a very good defender. Now he's gotten to the point where he is passable in the outfield.
And I think he's actually decent at first.
Has been a good first baseman. And I'd say he's been a good outfielder. Now, I don't know if he's ever going to be well above average, but he's average and he can play out there. And Luken Baker, again, why do we talk about Luken Baker as a guy like, what's his role in the big league? Well, it's as a pinch hitter because he's got no versatility. Mm-hmm. He's just a first baseman. And no offense to Luken Baker, not a great first baseman. So I don't think they've ever gotten away from that. But yet what they continue to do is they continue to buy into the defense first approach. Well, that's how you end up with guys that are just below average offensively, like Pedro Pages, Michael Ciani. Look, it's great that those guys are great defensively. You know how you win baseball games? It's by scoring runs. And you've got to get guys that are balanced at those positions.
See, I don't know that I agree with that. I think you win baseball games by being great at something. So if that is being an elite offensive team, cool. But you have to commit to something. And this is what the Cardinals are doing this offseason. They're not committing to anything. They're not committing to being a great defensive team. They're not committing to being a great offensive team. They're not committing to being young. They're not committing to being good or bad. They're just committing to being a little bit of all of these things. And it becomes a mismatch. Like the Brewers have not been over the years a great offensive team. They are excellent defensively, and they have a great pitching staff. They win with run suppression. That's what the Cardinals were in the mid-2010s. That 2015 team, they're really good situationally as hitters, but really that team won because of pitching and defense. That was the whole goal of what they had been and what they had strived to be that year. So I agree with you, T-Bone, in general. Like, you need to be a great offensive team in order to win at the highest possible level. But you can win 90-plus games by just being excellent at run suppression, but you have to commit to it. And the Cardinals aren't willing to commit to any one lane. It's what Sonny Gray said at winter warmup. You got to commit to something and then just go for it. The Cardinals said they were going to, and then they ended up back in the same place that they've been all along. He's Tanner Hendrickson. That's Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. In 15 minutes, how much pressure is mounting on Doug Armstrong to get this thing fixed within the next year? We'll talk about that in a little bit. NFL Quick Hitters is next year on 101 ESPN. right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters with T-Bone and Grant on BK. Let's start out with this, T-Bone. Big news today is that Kellen Moore is going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Now, earlier today, if you read over on ESPN.com, Adam Schefter put together his most interesting teams this offseason. Number 1 was the Cincinnati Bengals. Number 2, the Browns. Number 3, the New Orleans Saints. That surprised me, to put it mildly. The reason why? Saints enter the offseason with roughly $60 million over the salary cap. They can't get much relief from Derek Carr, who has $10 million guaranteed and another $30 million scheduled to kick in on March 15th. Moving on from Carr would only save him a couple $1,000,000, which means he's probably going to be their quarterback this year. The Saints have officially entered the season in which they're going to have to take their medicine. I don't know what that looks like. They're going to have to cut a bunch of people and kick the can down the road once again. That credit card statement is starting to get to the point where they can't ignore it any longer. T-Bone, what are you expecting from Kellen Moore there? Like, is this salvageable?
No, it's why I'm a little surprised Kellen Moore took the job, because he's always been a name that's been floated around as kind of a hot candidate, right? Even when he was with Dallas, there was always, hey, Kellen Moore's interviewing for these jobs, and I figured at one point he would get his. My expectations for Kellen Moore is, sorry, dude, you're going to be like a 5-win team next year, and you're going to be going through a tanking process. Like, Kellen Moore should have like a 5-year runway here in New Orleans. And I don't know what his contract ended up that he signed.
Yep.
He should get about 5 years before there is any real pressure, because he is going to be entering a rebuild. I have no expectations for that football team going into next season.
$60 million over the cap. Here's what they can save cap space wise by cutting some of their players. Derek Carr, $1 million. Cam Jordan, it actually costs them more money than he is against the cap. Taysom Hill, $275,000.
Oh, wow.
Demario Davis, they could actually end up saving nothing. They would have to pay an extra $5 million. Ryan Ramczyk, he's got a $12 million cap hit. Yeah, they would have to spend 23 to cut him right now on their roster. Cesar Ruiz, an offensive lineman for them. He's $12 million against the cap. Maybe that'll save us a little bit of money. Nope. Cost you 20 to go ahead and cut him right now. Carl Granderson, $11 million against the cap. It would cost you 21 to remove him from the books. And one more, Tyrann Mathieu, getting a little bit up there in age. Maybe you decide, okay, maybe we're gonna wash our hands of this contract. $10 million against the cap. $12 million to cut him. Alvin Kamara, $25 million to cut him. They have no relief. I don't know how they do the cap gymnastics to get out from underneath these guys, dude. I have no idea. They're 60 million. They are not just a little bit over the cap. They are $55 million over the cap. And I just read a bunch of players that the average football fan has no idea who they are.
Yeah.
It's wild, man. It's absolutely wild.
It's going to be impressive when somehow they do it. But, I mean, they're at the spot where they almost just have to restructure a bunch of those again. And then you kick it right back down the road to what your point was, which they've been doing.
That's what you have to do.
Which they've done for, 5 years now?
They're going to have to tie themselves to Derek Carr for another season. That's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to give Derek Carr an extension this offseason. I'm not kidding.
Oh, brutal.
Because your biggest cap hits for them are Carr, Cam Jordan, Taysom Hill, Eric McCoy. And that goes from 51 to 2017, $15 million. You got to re-sign Derek Carr. I know it sounds crazy, but that's really your only option right now is to go ahead and do that. So, yeah, it's not a good place to be if you are the New Orleans Saints. All right, next thing up here, I wanted to get into the NFL draft because we are now in draft mode for a lot of fans. If you're not a fan of the Chiefs or the Eagles, you've probably been here for a little bit. Senior Bowl was last week, but now we're really in it. And today was the day when we got the first Field Yates mock draft.
Oh, yeah.
So he has at number 1 overall, the Tennessee Titans. They've got to be taking a quarterback, right? You've got Shador Sanders. You've got Cam Ward. Those are the two guys that you could potentially go out there and get. Nope, they're going to Travis Hunter in this mock draft. Number 2 overall, Cleveland Browns. All right, they know it's over for Deshaun Watson. It is time to go ahead and wash our hands of that. Let's get a quarterback to Cleveland. Nope, Abdul Carter, edge rusher from Penn State.
Okay.
Finally, as the first quarterback going at number 3 overall, Cam Ward, quarterback from Miami to the New York Giants. And then at number 4, Patriots take a tackle. Shador Sanders going number 6 overall in this mock draft to the Las Vegas Raiders. T-Bone, I think there are a lot of teams that are drafting this year in the top 3. Tennessee, Cleveland, New York. All could use a quarterback. Do you think any of them are going to take one? Let me ask this a different way. Are any of them worth taking in the top 3?
My answer to that question is no. I don't think Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders is a top 3 player in this draft. And if I'm being honest, I don't want to tie my franchise to them for the next, whatever it would be, 5 years, 3-4 years, whatever. Go a little quicker down their decision making. I look at both those guys, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and I don't know what the ceiling is on those guys. Like, I think they could be good. Like, they'll be fine. But am I going to draft like a guy that could be like the 21st best quarterback in the NFL in the top 3? I personally wouldn't. I would just take the best player if I'm the Tennessee Titans. And if I'm the Cleveland Browns, I'd take the best player. Or I would try and leverage that high pick, right? Is somebody going to be desperate enough to say, hey, we'll trade up because we do want to go and get one of those guys? I don't think those two are top 3 picks, and I wouldn't have that big a problem if the Titans ended up passing on the quarterback situation in the draft.
You know who stands the most to gain from this? Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold's going to get paid this offseason, dude. If you're one of these teams that's drafting up there, like, just spend all of the money on Darnold. I know it sounds crazy. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't want to do it, but you're backed into a corner, and if you don't have that quarterback, nothing else in your organization matters.
Yeah.
You know who else stands to gain something from this? Aaron Rodgers, because he's going to have a job
I was going to say Russell
year.
Wilson.
Yeah, Russell Wilson's another one. Justin Fields could be a third. Like these guys that are hitting the open market this offseason, they're going to have a real market out there because there are teams that are starved for some kind of an answer at the quarterback position, and there's just not enough available for you right now out in free agents or in the NFL draft. For what it's worth, yesterday, Adam Schefter was on with the Pat McAfee show. He said Sam Darnold is a candidate to be the Raiders starting quarterback. Quote, let's see if the Vikings let him go or not, though, end quote. If you're the Vikings, I think there's 2 ways that you can potentially play this out. One, you just let him walk. You get the comp pick next year, you get a 3rd-round pick in return. Number 2, you franchise tag him. I haven't looked at their cap situation right now, but you franchise tag him, and then you work out the deal to trade him. And if it doesn't work out, you rescind the tag right before the free agency begins, and you allow him to go ahead and hit the market at that point. But I think those are the 2 ways. I don't think there's any scenario in which Sam Darnold is back at a market value contract for him going into next season.
Yeah, they've got $58 million in cap space.
Yeah, that's probably the
Vikings.
move then. Franchise him, work out a deal with somebody else, get a 2nd-round pick in return. They can spend that money on him.
Yeah, I think that probably is the best way to go about it. I franchise him, try and work out a deal, make the trade, because somebody will make a move for him. Would you have any open-mindedness to him coming back to the Vikings for one more year?
J.J. McCarthy is my answer.
I mean, he hadn't played football in a
the
year.
way that things ended for Sam Darnold tells me everything I need to know. He's not my answer. I don't need to pay $50 million to Sam Darnold. I need to build up my team around J.J. McCarthy to find out if he can be the answer.
Yeah.
And if he stinks, then I move on next year. And the opportunity cost was spending $50 million a year on Sam Darnold. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
The only reason that I still would be somewhat open-minded to bringing him back, and I wouldn't give him a long-term deal. I would do the franchise tag.
Dude, that's all of your money then. You can't bring back any of your free agents.
I get it, but McCarthy hasn't played football in a year.
Yeah,
right?
but then now you find out.
I mean, that's a lot to ask for a guy that's been sitting coming off an injury.
It's a lot to ask for him to be $50 million against your cap next year.
But at least I saw Sam Darnold win me, whatever it was, 13, 14 football games. And, we saw how it ended. But he's a capable quarterback. And it at least gives me some hope as an organization. Like, if J.J. McCarthy's not the guy and I let Sam Darnold walk, now I'm in quarterback purgatory.
Here are their free agents going into this offseason. Cam Robinson, their left tackle. Harrison Smith, a safety. Multiple of their cornerbacks, including Byron Murphy and Stephon Gilmore, Aaron Jones, a couple other guys from the defensive side of the ball that had a little bit of an impact this season. You can't bring any of those guys back. None of them can return next year if you end up signing Sam Darnold, and then you cannot sign anybody in free agency. All of your cap space is taken up by returning with Sam Darnold next year. I don't think it's something that is feasible. You either sign him to a long-term deal, you can't have him on the tag. You either sign him to a long-term deal, and that's your plan, and you're trading J.J. McCarthy this offseason, or you let him walk. And the walking one, it allows you multiple different outs, which is franchise tag trade or just let him walk via free agency. But for me, no chance I'm bringing him back on a 1-year deal. No chance. And I wouldn't also bring him back on a multi-year contract. I don't think he's going to be worth it. I think it's going to be a mistake for whoever ends up paying him. It'll probably age similarly, but a little bit worse to what Jimmy Garoppolo got.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think what you saw from Darnold, to your point on him signing and it being a mistake, look, Darnold's fine when he's in a great situation. that's a great offense to be in, right? Kevin O'Connell, coach of the year, TJ Hawkinson, who wasn't great last year, but a solid tight end. Oh, by the way, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Edson, like, you got all the pieces you need for that offense. If I go and sign with the Raiders, who you just connected them to, what do we got? We got
Brock Bowers.
Bowers is nice. And what else?
Brock Bowers.
Yeah, okay.
If you ask me for another player, I'll tell you they got Brock Bowers. Defense has some interesting pieces. Max Crosby, Brock Bowers, those are good pieces to build around. Jacoby Myers is decent, but yeah, it's not the same supporting cast. And I don't think that they're necessarily set up for future success. All right, he's T-Bone. That is Grant Francis. I'm Brandon Kiley. I do wonder if Russell Wilson ends up being the answer in Vegas, by the way. Coming up next, is pressure starting to build on Doug Armstrong to get this thing figured out within the next year? We'll talk about that here on BK and Ferrario.
Grant Francis here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The news out of the NFL this morning, the Saints are finalizing a deal with Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, according to NFL.com, to become their new head coach. So it looks like the Super Bowl champion offensive coordinator Kellen Moore will be headed to New Orleans. If you miss anything this morning from TMA down at spring training, you can go to the podcast page on 101ESPN.com or on your 101 ESPN mobile app, presented by Schaefer Door Company. You can catch interviews from Victor Scott, Gordon Graceffo, Quinn Matthews, and Luke and Baker. Some great conversations this morning from the guys on TMA. And then later tonight, stay tuned. We'll have some men's college basketball for you. Creighton and UConn pregame coming up at 7:45 and tip-off at 8 o'clock. I'm Grant Francis. The Sports Center update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
As we have this opportunity to kind of reset with where the Blues are at right now, 55 points in the first 56 games. It's looking more and more likely that they will miss the postseason for a third consecutive year. It's only the second time in franchise history that has happened. The only other time was in the mid-2000s when you went through the 05 to 08 stretch, and then eventually they started to make the push. Ken Hitchcock gets here, boom, you go on that extended run of success. They have never in their entire history as an organization missed the postseason in 4 consecutive seasons. And T-Bone, I wanted to discuss this because that feels like something kind of similar to the Cardinals where, hey, this team does not go under 500. It doesn't happen here in St. Louis. They will not do that. It feels like something that they would like to avoid. Of us saying at the end of the 2025-26 season, hey, for the first time in franchise history, the Blues have missed the playoffs in 4 consecutive seasons. With that in mind, how much pressure is starting to ramp up on Doug Armstrong to not just get this thing back on track, but to get them back into the postseason by next season?
I agree with what JR said earlier. I don't know if there's pressure coming internally towards Doug Armstrong, but I do think it is going to start to really ramp up here from the fan base because of what you said. It kind of is a unwritten expectation that, or not unwritten, it is an expectation. Hey, the Blues don't go through long stretches of missing the playoffs. And Doug Armstrong said when they started this retool, and we talked about it at the time, hey, fans appreciate the honesty. And he said, hey, look, this is going to take probably 3 to 5 years in this retool. You're going to have to be patient with us. And I think when this year kind of changed of, hey, we think we can be a playoff team, and it's clear this team is not going to be a playoff team, I think fans are now looking at this going, well, what is the direction of this retool? Because we fired 2 head coaches at this point. You're on your 3rd head coach during this retool now with Jim Montgomery. You have added some pieces that look like they're going to belong in this core for the long term. Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg. You end up extending Pavel Buchnevich. You've got this core in place under contract in Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, and yet they're not going anywhere. And now Doug Armstrong has come out and said, hey, we're watching the core. This is our next focus now. The hourglass has slowly creeped down, and we are now focused on our core guys. And that's why you're starting to kind of hear Braden Chen's name be floated around in trade rumors. And all the reports around the Blues are Army's upset with this team, and he's ready to make moves. I think there's pressure now starting to build from the fan base of, okay, we want to see progress. Right now it's stalled out. They have not improved from last season. They're going to finish with less points than they did last year. And sure, they've got prospects in their pipeline that they like, but we know what prospects are. They're prospects. And until you see them and see what they really are at the NHL level, they're nothing more than a pipe dream right now. So I do think there is some pressure building from the fan base of, okay, we were told 3 to 5 years and that we wanted to be competitive in this. And let's just be honest, Blues aren't real competitive this year, and they don't feel like they've got a plan, but it's not clear what the plan is going to lead to. That they're building around more of depth of scoring, in my opinion, than they are building around a superstar. And I think that's where the pressure really starts to mount.
Grant, I'm curious your thoughts on this. To me, I think he's got another half of next season. And what I mean by that is I think that the last building blocks that we have not seen yet are Dvorsky and Snuggerud. And they've been pointing to them for a while now as these are the things we're missing, and you can watch them on a night in, night out basis, and it's not hard to see. They're missing a goal scorer that can be on the wing in their top 6, and they're missing a middle 6 center. We can all see that as they've got Oscar Sundqvist and Radek Faksa and Matthew Joseph masquerading as third-line centers, which is not what they are at this point in their respective careers. So we can see what they're missing. We see who is supposed to be able to fill those holes. And then it becomes a question of, okay, you've sold me on this. I'll believe you. I have no reason not to. Is it going to work? Because if it doesn't work, if those guys don't look ready to help this team take that next step, and it's unfair pressure for them, but it's the reality of where they're at right now. If it doesn't work, that's when the pressure mounts. That's when we get to with the Blues, where we are right now, where Dylan Carlson, or where we are with the Cardinals. Dylan Carlson failed. Jordan Walker's not the player they sold him to us as. Nolan Gorman's not the player they sold him to us as. All the pitchers have not lived up to the expectations. Now you see the criticism as an avalanche over the body of John Mozeliak right now. That's not there yet, and I don't think it's going to be there necessarily to the same degree with Doug Armstrong, but that's how it happens, is if these young guys that are about to come up don't live up to expectations, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think for Doug Armstrong, I agree with what you said, Tanner, about what JR said about, I don't think it's from an organizational standpoint there's a lot of pressure on Army or anything. I think this comes down to him personally and how he wants to leave this team. I think he wants to put this team in the best situation possible for after he hands the reins off to Alexander Steen. And I think that, he has pulled everything possible over these last few years to make this team better. He has gone to every extent, like whether it be offer sheets, waiver claims, trading players with no trade clauses. Some work, some haven't.
Trading picks for veterans.
Like, he has gone down every single avenue the past few years. Really, the only thing he hasn't done is made a blockbuster, huge core move, which is now starting to become the conversation as we're in the third year of this and really nothing has happened. Say all that to go back to the point of pressure on Doug Armstrong. I think this is the first time over these last 3 years that he's probably disappointed with his team. And disappointed with the trajectory of where he predicted them to be. Like, that 2022-23 season was obviously disappointing, but that group had an expiration date coming. That's just how it was. Like, they were hoping to make a push for it, and at some point that was going to have to come to an end. So you start the retool process, and first year, you expect it to be a little rough. This year, you expect the trajectory to keep increasing, but they're not even in the same position they were as last year.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of that's where the pressure lies, is the fact that you were on a steady increase, and all of a sudden that's flattened out, no matter what you do.
And it's the top players. Like, that's the part that's frustrating. I can live with that. If it's, hey, Zach Bolduc's making stupid mistakes and he's turning it over in his own end, it's going in the back of the net all the time. Like, if you had like a really young, if Philip Broberg came in, and you can see the flashes, but man, there are just some real moments where this is just going to take some experience at the NHL level. Yeah. Like, we can all live with that. That's young players just getting the experience that they need. Same thing will be true when Snuggerud and Dvorsky get here. We can live with that. Cool, no problem. The problem is you've got Kyrou, that's, I think, taken a step forward in a lot of different ways, but Thomas feels like he's taken a little bit of a step back. Booch has taken a little bit of a step back. You see some of the issues in net this year that have been problematic for them. That's a step back. Falk taking a step back. When that's happening for your age 26-plus guys, that's where I think the frustration comes in of, okay, cool, yeah, you've got all these young players. What about the guys that we were supposed to be ready to win with? Because the young players are accelerating as these other players are reaching their prime, but the prime years are supposed to be what you're able to capitalize on, and they're not performing the way that we all thought they were. So that, to me, is where the pressure really starts to mount. Not even those are not on Doug Armstrong. That's on the players.
Yeah.
And that's where you end up getting into the spot that Grant was describing as a potential blockbuster deal, whether it's at the deadline or going into this offseason. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Hey, help heat up St. Louis this Friday morning during the 25th annual Hardee's Rise and Shine fundraiser. Stop by any participating Hardee's in the bi-state area on Friday morning, and you can get a sausage biscuit or egg biscuit for just $1. 100% of the proceeds, all collected, will be going towards Heat Up St. Louis, supporting people in need for both Missouri and Illinois. That's on Friday morning at any participating Hardee's. Find more information at 101ESPN.com. Coming up next, we're going to hit the BK and Ferrario Rewind, put a bow on this thing here on 101 ESPN.
run it back with the Daily Rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Loom, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Huge thanks to Grant today for filling in for Alex. Alex out this week. He'll be back in next week as he has this week off for the Four Nations Face-Off Blues Off. Alex gets a little bit of vacation. If you missed anything from the show today, be sure to check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Schaefer Door Company.
That 101 ESPN app, like I said, is free to download, super easy to use. You can check out all of our podcasts over there. That is all presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. And while you're there, check out what TMA is doing as they are broadcasting all week this week live from Cardinal Spring Training in Jupiter, Florida. Don't miss their interviews this week. They've got some pretty good ones coming up. They had some good ones today. Victor Scott joined them, Gordon Graceffo, Quinn Matthews down there. It's all at Roger Dean Stadium all week long. It's brought to you by CarStar, your auto body repair experts, and by Sumner One, print and business technology solutions that keep your workplace humming. All right, to finish out the show today, we're going to go back to what we started with, and that is Nolan Arenado. The latest update is kind of what it's been. It was reported on MLB Network yesterday by Mark Feinsand that the Cardinals and the Red Sox are still talking about this, and the Red Sox are interested. It's just a matter of getting a deal done there. Bregman's sweepstakes are influencing this. Jeff Passan, I thought, had maybe the biggest update that we've seen thus far. He wrote over on ESPN.com that Arenado would indeed accept a trade to Boston. That is legitimate reporting. He would end up waiving that no-trade clause to go to Boston. He also added that one of the things that's holding this up potentially is the Cardinals' willingness to eat more of the money in Arenado's deal. And he said that's ultimately going to come down to a decision by Bill DeWitt Jr. T-Bone, got just a couple of minutes here before we pass things over to the fast lane, but with the new reporting that we've seen from Passan, Katie Wu, and also Mark Feinsand, where do you stand with the way that things are going with Arenado and the likelihood that he's here on opening day?
I still feel like he's going to be here because I think if ownership was going to give a green light to eat more money, I think they would have done it by now, because it sounds like Bregman wants a 6-year deal, and it doesn't sound like the Red Sox want to give it to him based on what reports have said. And there's no coincidence that they've rekindled the fire, right, with the St. Louis Cardinals. So I think if the Cardinals really want to go this youth movement, and they are 100% in on it, I think they would have made this happen by now. Or they make it happen within the next, week before players report, because I think the Cardinals position players report on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So I would think by then, if you're the Cardinals and you really want to go youth movement, ownership would green light eating more money and making a deal happen.
I think it's going to get done. I continue to hold out hope that they will find a way to get this thing done. I think when Bregman does end up signing elsewhere, it ends up removing some of the leverage that the Boston Red Sox currently have over the Cardinals, which is, if we don't do this, we'll go do this. I don't know how real that is. I don't think they're going to give Bregman the deal that he's looking for. But until that is officially off the table, they can use it as leverage over the Cardinals. I think that's going to happen. I think Bregman ends up signed with one of the Cubs or the Detroit Tigers. The Red Sox then have to come back to the Cardinals and say, okay, we'll eat a little bit less. Maybe instead of $15 million, it's $20 to $25 million that the Cardinals have to eat on the contract. I think they'll eventually get to the place where Mo convinces DeWitt and says, hey, we have got to do this. This is something that is necessary for us to move forward the way that we all wanted to going into this season. I think they'll do it. I don't have the same amount of faith or hope or belief that that will be the case as I did 3 months ago, but I think they'll do it. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. We will talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. Expected to be joined by Chris Kerber for the show tomorrow. The Fast Lane's got you guys taken care of from 2 to 6 right here on 101 ESPN.